Have you ever wondered what secrets the world still hides beneath its soil, and what ancient voices wait to be heard again? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the channel where history's most mysterious artifacts are brought back to life in story. Please subscribe to our channel, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Alright, let's begin. The bracelet that broke the earth. The steppe at night has no borders. It is an endless sea of grass that sighs beneath the wind, stretching from horizon to horizon until the earth seems to dissolve into the sky. Out here, under the pale gleam of a swollen moon, silence is not emptiness but presence, an ancient weight pressing down, as if the land itself remembers. And somewhere beneath this endless sweep of earth, wrapped in soil and centuries, lay a bracelet, a coil of gold so carefully shaped it seemed almost alive, so radiant it could have been mistaken for a piece of the sun itself. They called it the bracelet that broke the earth. It was not found in a palace, nor within the safety of city walls. No, it emerged from a burial mound, one of the countless kurgans that dot the Kazakh steppe, each one a quiet mound rising like the humps of sleeping giants. These mounds, to most, are only shapes in the land, features of a horizon already too vast to comprehend. But to those who know, they are graves, and each grave hides treasures and memories, buried with the warriors, nobles, and wanderers of the Scythian people. The Scythians were riders of the wind, nomads who mastered the horse so completely that ancient writers said they seemed born in the saddle. They left behind no grand cities of stone, no towering monuments. What they left instead were the mounds, silent sentinels, each guarding the remnants of lives, fierce, fleeting, and often violent. Within these tombs, archaeologists have uncovered weapons, armor, cups of gold, and ornaments so delicately worked they rival the finery of empires. But among them, the bracelet stood apart. It was heavy, coiled like a serpent, its body twisting and tightening upon itself. At each end, finely worked heads, beasts caught between the natural and the mythic, gazed outward, their mouths open as though ready to speak. The gold was not merely hammered, it was alive, carved with swirling patterns that seemed to move in the firelight, and those who saw it swore that when held to the ear, faint vibrations hummed through it, like the echo of some forgotten thunder. The Scythians were a people bound to the earth and sky, their lives patterned by seasons of migration, by hunts and battles, by storms sweeping across the plains. Yet they also lived in myth, in stories whispered by firelight, in songs carried by winds that knew no boundary. The bracelet belonged to this liminal place, where the real and the impossible blurred. Legends tell us that it was forged not by mortal hands, but by the earth itself, cracked open in a single night, when the sky had burned green, and the steppe trembled. They say lightning struck so fiercely it split the ground, and when the fire cleared, the bracelet lay in the scar. A gift, or a curse, no one could decide. The shaman who first lifted it from the earth felt his fingers shake with a power that was not his own, and the stories say he whispered, "This will break the land, or bind it forever." Of course, archaeologists speak differently. They describe workshops of Scythian artisans, traveling with the tribes, carrying crucibles and molds, hammering thin sheets of gold into art so precise it rivaled Greek craftsmanship. They imagine hands stained with soot, bending fire and earth into shapes that captured the wild spirit of the steppe. Yet even the most rational scholars admit, there was something uncanny about this piece. Its weight did not seem to match its size, its surface never tarnished, no matter how long it lay in the ground. It became a symbol, not just of wealth but of rupture. Warriors wore it in their graves, but none were said to wear it in life for long. The stories claim it demanded blood, that when clasped on a wrist it seemed to tighten, pulsing faintly, until the wearer found themselves restless, unable to sleep, longing for battle, for conquest, for destruction. One chieftain of the Scythians, whose name has long since faded, was said to have bound it upon his arm before leading his people against a rival tribe. The battle was swift and brutal, rivers of blood ran through the grass, and the earth itself split open under the charge of thousands of hooves. In the aftermath, the chieftain stood victorious, but when he looked to his arm, the bracelet had left a mark, burning deep into his skin as though it had fused with his very flesh. Days later, storms came. Storms so violent that whole sections of land were swallowed. Entire herds vanished. The survivors whispered that the bracelet had demanded a price. Whether myth or memory, such tales clung to the bracelet. To wear it was to invite power, but also disaster. The Scythians began to bury it rather than use it, passing it from one mound to another, as if hoping the earth might contain what their hands could not. And so it lay for centuries, through winters when wolves prowled the frozen grasslands, through summers when caravans passed along the Silk Road, through the slow rise and fall of empires to the west and east. Always the mound covered it, and always the land remembered. When it was finally unearthed in modern times, it startled those who found it. Gold, after all, should dull with time, should gather dust and lose its sheen. But this bracelet glowed, as though the earth itself had polished it through the centuries. The beasts at its ends seemed to breathe, their mouths caught in a moment between roar and whisper, and when the archaeologist lifted it into the sunlight, some swore the ground beneath them gave a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. To describe the bracelet is to wander between art and enigma. Its curves are precise, yet alive, like rivers frozen in motion. Its weight is too much for ornament, yet too fine for mere ritual. Some believe it was part of a set, others lost or buried deeper still. Others claim it was never meant to adorn a human wrist at all, but to serve as an offering, a conduit between people and the unseen forces they feared and revered. The Scythians did not separate life from death, earth from sky, myth from memory. For them, the bracelet may have been a piece of all three, a reminder that the ground beneath their feet was alive, and that to touch it carelessly was to risk being broken by it. And so tonight, as we linger on this vast step of history, the bracelet lies before us, coiled, gleaming, whispering. Was it truly forged by lightning, or merely by the skill of forgotten hands? Did it break the earth, or was that only the story of a people trying to make sense of the storms that ruled their world? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, an artifact born of both craft and imagination, carrying within it the weight of a people whose lives were lived on the edge of survival, whose memories still hum beneath the soil of Kazakhstan. And if you listen closely, if you lean into the silence of the steppe, you might hear it still, the faint hum of gold against the pulse of the earth, the echo of hooves across grass, the voice of a bracelet that refused to sleep. The crown that waited for no king. The soil was heavy with spring rain when the farmers turned it, their spades clinking softly against the stones that dotted the fields near Schifferstadt. For most, these were ordinary fields, as ordinary as any in Germany, where seeds sprouted and harvests came in their time. But that day, something bright surfaced from beneath the earth, something too bright, too perfect to belong to soil and root. It was a shimmer, a glint like sunlight captured in metal, too yellow to be bronze, too soft to be iron. The farmer bent, brushed it with his hand, and what he uncovered was not stone, not weapon, not coin. It was a crown, but not like any crown he had ever imagined. It rose like a cone, long and slender, its surface covered in repeating patterns, circles, dots, suns, moons, tiny wheels of time pressed into fragile sheets of gold. It was thin enough to bend, yet whole enough to stand tall, its gleam unspoiled by the centuries. To lift it was to feel almost nothing, for it weighed little more than a breath, but to see it was to feel the weight of questions heavier than stone. This was no ordinary crown. This was the golden hat of Schifferstadt, and from the moment it touched daylight, its mystery began to whisper again. It looked too delicate to have survived. Gold of this thinness should have torn, melted, or been buried under the greed of generations. Yet here it was, complete, its designs intact, as though it had been waiting not for kings but for time itself. And those designs, rows upon rows of tiny punched symbols, were not random. They seemed deliberate, mathematical, perhaps astronomical. Each row followed the next with rhythm, repeating yet shifting, like music carved into metal. To wear it would have been absurd. It rose high, almost as long as the span of a human forearm. It would have towered above the head of any who placed it upon their brow. Its fragility meant that even the brush of a branch could dent it, the slip of a hand could tear it. And yet it was made, and made with patience, hammered gold, beaten to the thinness of paper, adorned with hundreds of stamped figures. Why? For whom? And most of all, what was it meant to do? Some have said it was no crown at all, but a calendar. The symbols, they argue, match the cycles of the sun and moon. One band counts lunar months, another tracks the solar year. Together they trace the 19-year Metonic cycle, the span of years after which sun and moon realign in their dance across the sky. To those who lived by seasons, who planted with the moon and harvested with the sun, such knowledge was power greater than swords. If this crown was a calendar, then the one who wore it was not a king but something stranger, a priest of time, a keeper of cycles, the bridge between earth and sky. Imagine the Bronze Age world, 3,000 years ago. Villages clustered by rivers, smoke rising from hearths, cattle moving through pastures. The night sky was their clock, the sun their promise of life, the moon their lantern through darkness. The priest who could say, "The moon will vanish here, the sun will return there," was more powerful than any ruler of men. Such a priest might not wear armor, might not command armies, but in his hands the people placed trust deeper than loyalty. He did not rule with laws, he ruled with certainty that the seasons would not fail. If the crown was such a tool, then it was not just gold, it was knowledge hammered into metal. Knowledge made wearable, visible, sacred. To wear it was to place the cosmos upon one's head, to embody the cycle of time itself. But others whisper differently. They say it was not only a calendar, but a crown of initiation, a relic of shamans who walked between worlds. The cone shape, rising impossibly high, was no accident. It stretched upward, a finger of gold pointing toward heaven, channeling the divine into the body of the wearer. To place it upon the head was not merely to calculate the sky, it was to become the sky, to let the body serve as the axis between earth and stars, and perhaps that is why kings never wore it. For what king could claim the authority of the heavens themselves? To wear such a crown would be to risk hubris, to claim what belonged not to thrones but to mysteries. There are other golden hats, 3 more scattered across Europe, one in Berlin, another in Switzerland, another in France, each nearly identical, each repeating the same strange symbols, each too fragile to be practical yet too deliberate to be meaningless. Together they form a network of secrets, a chain across the continent. Whoever made them carried knowledge far and wide, a knowledge more enduring than empires, and in each place the hat seems to have been buried, hidden deliberately, perhaps to guard it, perhaps to protect its power, perhaps to ensure it waited for no king but only for those chosen to understand. Legends cling to them, as mist clings to valleys. Some say the hats were gifts from gods of the sky, dropped like fire to the earth. Others say they were cursed, that those who dared to wear them without learning their secrets were driven into madness, their minds unraveling under the weight of time itself. There are whispers too that the hats were never meant for humans at all, but for beings who stood taller, stranger, beings whose heads could bear such elongated crowns without shame. The truth, as always, lies silent. The hat does not explain itself. It offers no script, no instruction, no voice, only rows of dots and rings, circles within circles, suns within moons. But in those circles lie mathematics, astronomy, the rhythm of the cosmos. And so the crown waits, not for rulers but for readers. When the hat was uncovered in Schifferstadt, the farmers at first thought it treasure, something to be sold for its weight in gold. But soon scholars intervened, rescuing it from the fate of being melted, saving it for study. And when their eyes first traced the rows, they began to see what the ancients had seen. That this was no ornament, but a library hammered into gold. A book of time, fragile yet eternal. To wear it, then, was a ritual. Picture it, a man or perhaps a woman, standing at the heart of a gathering. The firelight flickers, the crown of gold rests upon their head, tall and gleaming, catching the flames in its countless tiny circles. Around them the people wait, breath held, eyes on the one who wears the sky. And then, lifting their voice, the wearer speaks. The moon will vanish on this night, the sun will return on this day. The cycle is secure, the seasons are safe, and the people, hearing, believe. This is why it is said to be the crown that waited for no king. For kings rule with armies, with gold, with fear. But this crown belongs to none of them. It waits instead for those who can read it, those who can bear its weight, not upon the skull, but upon the mind. Its authority is not conquest, but certainty, not dominion, but time. Today, behind glass, it glimmers quietly. Visitors step close, peer at its fragile surface, marvel at its survival. They see a crown too strange to be worn, too fragile to be used. And yet, if they lean close, if they let their eyes follow the rows of suns and moons, they may begin to feel the pulse of it, the rhythm of the seasons, the endless dance of light and dark. It is not silent, it sings, but in numbers, in cycles, in time itself. And so it rests, this golden cone of mystery. It has outlasted kingdoms, outlasted wars, outlasted those who buried it. It will likely outlast us too. For gold does not rust. Knowledge, once hammered into form, does not fade. The crown still waits, not for kings, but for those who can listen to the heavens and hear the secrets pressed into its gleaming skin, and in that waiting, it remains eternal. The bell that called no worshippers. There are sounds that are meant to stir the world, sounds that rise not from mere vibration but from the weight of belief itself. Bells have long held such a place among human creations. They summon, they warn, they celebrate, and they mourn. But what happens when a bell, massive and immovable, is cast with the intent to call forth the faithful, only to remain largely silent, its voice swallowed by centuries of shifting sands of history? In Japan there rests a bell so vast in size and legend that it is said to have been meant for more than a temple, more than a city. It was crafted for an empire, perhaps even for the heavens themselves. The Daibutsu bell, the great bronze monument associated with the towering Buddha statues of Nara and Kamakura, carries with it a paradox. It was built to call worshippers, yet so often it rang for no one, echoing instead into the emptiness of time. Imagine it first not as artifact but as presence. A bell taller than men, wide enough that several could stand within its mouth. Its surface is covered in worn but deliberate markings, Buddhist motifs, lotus petals, sacred sutras pressed into bronze. The metal itself has darkened to green-black, oxidized by air and centuries. Yet when you draw close you can almost sense a hum lingering inside it, as though it holds sound trapped within, a memory of the deep resonant strike it once released. The making of such a bell was no casual endeavor. To cast bronze of such scale in the 8th century was a feat bordering on impossible. Bronze had to be smelted in enormous furnaces. The heat kept constant and furious, while teams of artisans poured liquid metal into molds dug into the earth. It was dangerous, the fumes thick and poisonous, the heat enough to scald the flesh from any careless hand. Workers were said to have tied charms to their garments, calling upon the Buddha's mercy to shield them from the flames. Some legends even whisper that human lives were lost in the casting, that workers fell into the molten metal, their bodies consumed and fused into the very substance of the bell. The bell itself then might carry human essence within its core, binding mortality and eternity in a single sound. When struck, such bells were said to produce tones not like the ringing of Western church bells, but deep, sonorous waves that rolled out like the breath of the earth itself. These were not notes that ended quickly but tones that lingered, stretching across valleys and forests, vibrating through the air until they seemed to become part of it. Striking the bell was never casual. A suspended wooden beam, swung like a battering ram, connected with its side, sending out a sound so profound it was believed to resonate in the bones of all who heard it. But the Daibutsu bell faced a strange fate. Unlike bells that called monks to prayer daily, this one was rarely used. In part it was simply too large, too unwieldy, requiring effort and ceremony to awaken its voice, and in part it became overshadowed by the sheer presence of the colossal Buddha statues it was built alongside, the great Buddha of Nara and later, the Daibutsu of Kamakura. Worshippers came not for the bell but for the serene gaze of the giant Buddhas, seated in meditation, radiating peace. The bell became almost a companion piece, grand yet silent, a sentinel rather than a herald. What then is an artifact built to speak, but destined for silence? Perhaps that is why stories cling to it, to give it voice in another way. One tale claims that the bell once rang on its own, that during a storm, when lightning struck nearby, the vibrations shook it and it released a sound without human touch. Villagers who heard it said it was no ordinary tone but a cry, a lament that rolled through the rain like the mourning of a god. Another story suggests the bell was cursed, that it could only be rung properly when the empire itself was in balance, when peace and order reigned. Any strike in times of discord would produce only a flat, hollow note, unworthy of the Buddha it was meant to honor. There are even whispers that the bell hides inscriptions no one has fully deciphered. Along its inner curve are grooves and marks that scholars debate. Are they simply wear, or the remnants of sutras burned into the bronze? Some monks believed that to read the bell was to glimpse the cycles of history itself, the rise and fall of rulers encoded in metal. Yet centuries of corrosion have made them faint, and to run one's hand across them is to feel nothing more than the cold smoothness of age. In the long quiet stretches of its life, the bell has become something else, a mirror for silence itself. Picture it resting in its pavilion, the air heavy with incense from nearby shrines. Cicadas drone in the heat of summer, leaves fall in the muted hush of autumn. Snow drifts down in winter, collecting in the grooves of the bell until it looks draped in white robes. It sits through it all, unmoving, unstruck, yet holding presence all the same. Pilgrims visit it not to hear its sound, but to stand before it, sensing the weight of centuries pressing down, the untold prayers that have brushed against its surface. Why does this silence matter? Because silence, in the tradition of Buddhism, is not emptiness, but fullness. The absence of noise is not lack, but space for meditation, for inner sound. The Daibutsu bell may not have called worshippers in the way its makers intended, but perhaps it called them in another sense, by being a still anchor in a world of impermanence, a reminder that what is not heard can still be deeply felt. And yet, we cannot escape the irony. A bell is built to sound. It exists to be struck. Its very shape is the architecture of vibration. To remain mostly silent is to contradict its purpose, to embody paradox. That paradox gives the Daibutsu bell its haunting allure. It is a relic both of what was and of what never quite came to be, a monument to unfulfilled potential, to a voice meant to carry across ages but muffled instead. Travelers who have stood before it say they feel both awe and unease. Awe at its sheer size and craftsmanship, unease at the sense that it waits for a strike that may never come, or for a listener who may finally understand what it has held inside for more than 1,000 years. What then does the bell whisper in its silence? Perhaps that history is not only about what happened, but also about what could have happened. Perhaps it tells us that not every voice finds its audience, that some sounds are swallowed by time, but remain resonant nonetheless, if only in the imagination, or perhaps it waits for one final strike, a resonance so pure it will carry not just across valleys, but across centuries, a sound that will at last fulfill the promise bound into its molten bronze at the moment of creation. And until that strike comes, the bell rests, silent, eternal, yet filled with the potential of all the sound it has not released. A paradox, a relic, a reminder. The bell that called no worshippers, yet speaks still to anyone willing to listen in the silence. The stone that dreamed of fire. There are stones that lie unnoticed beneath the sand. forgotten fragments of once great monuments, their edges worn by centuries of desert winds. And then there are stones whose very existence reshaped how humanity thought of the world, stones whose weight was not in their mass but in the beliefs pressed upon them. Of all the stones to emerge from the long corridors of Egyptian history, none is quite so enigmatic as the benben, a stone that was not merely a symbol but a foundation, not merely carved but conceived as the axis between the earth and the divine. The benben is not a single artifact you can walk into a museum and see with certainty. It is an idea, a relic of myth, given form in stone, and yet also an object whose fragments may still sit in Cairo under glass. It is the origin point of pyramids, the seat of temples, the heart of Egyptian cosmogony. The benben was said to be the first mound to emerge from the waters of Nun, the primordial chaos before creation, where nothing yet existed but swirling infinite waters. Out of this endless sea rose a peak, a stone hillock touched by the first rays of the sun. That peak was the benben, and upon it the god Atum stood, bringing light, fire and order into being. To dream of fire then was natural for this stone, for fire was not destruction in that myth but illumination, the first blaze of the sun cutting across the void. The Egyptians believed that the very act of rising, of lifting out of nothingness, was sacred. Every pyramid that came after, with its tapering sides and sharp peak, was a reflection of that first mound. Every obelisk that pointed to the sky was a fragment of the benben extended into the world of men. The original benben was kept at Heliopolis, the city of the sun, where the priests of Ra tended to its mysteries. Heliopolis was not merely a city, but the intellectual and spiritual center of creation myths. Here, beneath a sky perpetually burned by the desert sun, the cult of Ra flourished, and at the heart of their temple was the benben, a dark, smooth, pyramidal stone said to have once blazed with gold leaf or electrum, so that when sunlight struck it, it glowed like fire itself. Pilgrims would enter the temple not to see idols in human form, but to gaze upon this stone, this embodiment of the first land, the first light, the promise that life could emerge from chaos. And yet, like all Egyptian relics, the benben carried layers of meaning. To the uninitiated, it was merely a stone, a shape, but to those who studied its placement and purpose, it was a kind of axis mundi, a world axis, a pillar connecting sky, earth and underworld. At its apex, the stone mirrored the path of the sun. Its surfaces were aligned to the cardinal directions, so that as the sun rose and fell, its light played across the sides in measured rhythms. The priests saw in those lights messages, cycles, affirmations, that the world was still aligned with the order, the mot of creation. When we see pyramids today, monumental and immovable, it is easy to forget that their tips, their capstones, or pyramida, were covered in shining stone, polished and plated, intended to mirror the benben itself. Each pyramid was, in a sense, a recreation of that first rising mound, a colossal echo of the moment when Adam climbed from the chaos and called forth fire. The kings buried within pyramids were not simply seeking tombs but alignment with that eternal cycle. By resting beneath a peak that mirrored the benben, they hoped to be reborn with the sun, carried each day from darkness into light. But the benben itself was not confined to pyramids. In obelisks, the same form was extended skyward. The tall, tapering shafts that dotted temple courtyards were like frozen rays of sunlight, capped with miniature benbens at their peaks. The topmost pyramid of an obelisk was always the focus, polished to brilliance, inscribed with prayers to Re, gleaming with gold so that even from a distance the people could see the fire of creation reflected down to them. The entire Egyptian architectural language of sacred stone, then, grew from this one dream, a stone that remembered the first fire. To walk in ancient Heliopolis when the benben still stood, was to step into a place that was less city and more cosmic stage. Imagine entering the temple in the cool of dawn. Columns rise like papyrus stalks, hieroglyphs painted in red and blue. Priests move in silence, carrying offerings of lotus, incense, and bread. And at the center, housed within the shrine, stands the benben, dark but gleaming, small compared to the columns but greater in meaning than all of them. When the first rays of the rising sun pierce the temple's axis, they strike its peak, igniting it into sudden brilliance. For a moment, the room is filled with light, as if the stone itself were aflame, reborn again, as it was in the myth, carrying the dream of fire into another day. It is difficult now to know what became of the original stone. Some claim it was lost in the turbulence of late antiquity, destroyed when foreign powers swept through Egypt. Others whisper that fragments survive, moved from Heliopolis to safer sanctuaries, hidden even from the eyes of conquerors. A stone in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, small, black, and pyramidal, is said to be a surviving benben. Its surface is carved with inscriptions praising Atum Ra. Visitors who lean close can see the faint remains of hieroglyphs, though time has worn them down to shadows. Is this the true benben, the one that first dreamed of fire? Or is it merely a later replica, one of many pyramidia, made to echo the lost original? Perhaps that is the essence of the benben, to be both object and idea, both singular and infinite. For even if the original stone were gone, every pyramid, every obelisk, every capstone still carries its memory. The Egyptians did not build once, they repeated, mirrored, echoed. Each stone peak across their land is a fragment of that first rising mound, a reminder that creation is not a past event, but a perpetual cycle. And so the Benben lingers not only in stone, but in thought. It lingers in the way the Egyptians conceived of fire, not as destructive but as renewing, not as consuming but as illuminating. The sun's blaze each morning was the fire of a tomb reborn, and the stone, by catching it, was the eternal witness. To dream of fire is to long for transformation. The Benben dreamed so because it had once felt that first spark, the leap from nothing into being. Perhaps that is why we, thousands of years later, still feel drawn to its shadow. We too long to understand how order arises from chaos, how light emerges from dark. The Egyptians gave us a symbol for that yearning, fixed in stone. Stand before a pyramid today, its peak weathered, its capstone long vanished. The desert wind hums, the sun presses heat against your skin. You look up at its point and imagine it gleaming once, a golden mirror flashing the fire of the sky. You are staring at the memory of the Benben, the first stone, the stone that dreamed of fire. And in that dream, something of humanity's oldest question survives. How does the world begin, and how can we remain aligned with its blazing eternal rhythm? The Benben does not answer in words, it answers in silence, in light, in the immovable geometry of stone. And in its silence, perhaps we find a different kind of voice, one that tells us that creation is not an event locked in the past, but a fire that still burns, if only we learn to see it in the stones around us, in the rising sun, in the quiet of our own searching hearts. The sword that spoke in silence. There are weapons forged to wound, to guard, to defend, and to kill. But there are others, rarer still, that transcend their steel and become something greater. Vessels of memory, symbols heavy with silence. Among these, few rival the Wallace sword, a blade that has become almost inseparable from the man whose name it carries, and whose silence speaks louder than 1,000 shouted victories. The sword rests today in Stirling, in Scotland, though its presence seems less a display than a vigil. It is long, nearly 5.5 feet of steel, the kind of weapon that demands strength not only of muscle but of will. Its grip is rough, its crossguard simple, its lines unadorned. No gilded hilt, no jeweled pommel, no flourish to catch the eye. Its beauty is not in decoration but in stark endurance. This was not the sword of kings, nor a parade relic to dazzle courtiers. It was a soldier's weapon, harsh, functional, direct. And yet, more than 7 centuries after it was first raised, people still stand before it, hushed, as though it whispers something they cannot quite hear. To understand the Wallace sword, one must step back into Scotland of the late 13th century, when its steel was forged and its silence began. This was a land scarred by conflict, where clans contended, kings quarreled, and English ambition loomed heavy. Scotland, though proud, found itself caught in the grasp of Edward I of England, the king who styled himself Hammer of the Scots. It was a time when land was measured in blood, when loyalty was tested with fire, when the question of sovereignty was as sharp as any blade. Out of this turmoil rose William Wallace, a figure now draped in legend, though the details of his life remain cloaked in mist. Some say he was the son of a minor knight, others that he came from humbler roots. What is certain is that he carried into battle not only a sword but an idea, that Scotland could stand free. At Stirling Bridge in 1297, Wallace and his men achieved what seemed impossible. They crushed an English force far larger and better equipped. The bridge became a bottleneck, the river a trap, and Wallace turned the chaos of terrain into a decisive blow. For a moment, the air of Scotland filled not with silence, but with the cries of victory. But the Wallace sword, if it was there, did not shout. It carried no inscriptions to record the triumph. It did not gleam with engraved victories or bear blood grooves etched with names. Its silence was its power. For every battle fought with it, Stirling, Falkirk, skirmishes in the glens, the blade bore witness but never boasted. What sets the Wallace sword apart is not just its length or its association with Wallace, but what it came to embody after his death. Wallace was betrayed, captured, and taken to London, where he was executed with brutality, meant not only to kill, but to erase. His body was torn, scattered, displayed as a warning. His voice was silenced by force, and yet, in the silence that followed, his sword remained. The sword did not weep, nor rage, nor crack, it waited. Centuries passed, Scotland changed rulers, dynasties fell, revolts rose and were crushed, but the memory of Wallace, and by extension the memory of his sword, endured. When Scots told stories of resistance, they spoke of him. When they whispered of freedom in times when such words were dangerous, they recalled his defiance. The sword became less a weapon of iron than a relic of silence, silence not as emptiness, but as presence, as endurance, as the refusal to be erased. Its size itself adds to its aura. Standing before it, you realize it is not a weapon that could be wielded lightly. It demands 2 hands, a full body's strength, a complete commitment. This was not a sword for fencing in duels or flashing in tournaments. This was a battlefield blade, made to cut through armor, to sweep in arcs that cleared space, to stand in the thick of war. Its silence comes from its function. There is no subtlety in its design. It is pure necessity, honed into steel. Legends cling to it, as legends always cling to relics that survive where men fall. Some say Wallace's scabbard, belt, and pommel were fashioned from the skin of an English commander, a macabre tale that blends horror with defiance. Others dismiss it as medieval propaganda, a myth woven centuries later. Yet even in dismissing it, the legend persists, feeding the aura of the sword, for silence is rarely empty. It invites projection, imagination, story. The Wallace sword does not speak, instead it allows others to speak into it. In the 16th century, the sword was said to have been refurbished under King James IV of Scotland. Its hilt and crossguard may not be original, but replacements, fashioned to preserve the blade. This detail unsettles some, who crave authenticity in every rivet, but perhaps it deepens the story. For what is a symbol, if not something that must be renewed by each generation? The silence of the Wallace sword did not fade when its fittings were replaced. Its endurance was not in ornament, but in the length of its steel, the weight of its myth, the fire of memory it carried. And so today, when you stand before it in Stirling Castle, you notice the hush around it. Tourists chatter elsewhere, cameras click, footsteps echo on stone floors. But before the Wallace sword, there is pause. The sword does not move, does not shine with gem or gold, yet it commands stillness. Children lower their voices, adults fold their arms. It is not fear, it inspires, but reverence, the recognition that here stands more than steel. Here stands silence that has outlasted centuries, silence that speaks of resistance, of endurance, of a voice that could not be crushed. The Wallace sword's silence is also a mirror. To some it speaks of patriotism, to others, rebellion, to still others, sacrifice. It says different things to those who listen, depending on what they bring to it. That is the secret of silence. It is not empty, but open. Weapons are usually remembered for the wounds they caused, the deaths they delivered, but the Wallace sword is remembered for what it represents, for the life of a man who refused to bend, and for the silence that followed his execution, a silence that became not erasure, but echo. In that echo, generations heard something worth remembering. Imagine for a moment the blade being carried in battle. Wallace's hands gripping the hilt, the weight dragging against his muscles, the sound of iron ringing as it strikes shield or armor. The air is filled with shouting, the ground trembles with horses, and yet within the chaos there is a clarity, a silence of purpose, of focus, of the idea that this fight is more than survival. That silence is what the sword still carries. And now, in the quiet halls of Stirling, it waits, not in use, not in combat, but still speaking in its way. The sword's silence is not the silence of abandonment, but of presence. It is the silence of stone standing where battles once raged, the silence of mountains watching generations pass, the silence of something that has outlived its wielder, yet remains bound to his memory. The Wallace sword, then, is not only Scotland's relic but humanity's reminder that silence can be louder than words, that endurance can outlast destruction, and that even when a voice is cut off, its echo can carry through centuries. So the sword stands, mute yet eloquent, heavy yet weightless, ordinary yet transcendent. It does not boast, it does not glitter, it does not command with force, it simply endures. And in its enduring silence, it speaks, not of death, but of defiance, not of conquest, but of the quiet, unyielding fire of freedom. This is the sword that spoke in silence, and it is still speaking. The throne that burned without flame. There is a silence that clings to ruins long after voices are gone. Stones remember weight, ivory remembers touch, and ash remembers the shape of flame, even when no fire lingers. Deep within the labyrinth of Knossos, beneath the fractured ceilings, where once painted dolphins swam across plastered walls, there rests a throne unlike any other. It is carved not from gold, nor iron, nor marble, but ivory, pale as bone, fragile as memory. They call it the throne of Minos, though the man, or myth, it once served has vanished into the smoke of centuries. It is said that when you step into the chamber where the throne waits, you feel first the air, heavy, as if the walls breathe slowly around you. The seat itself gleams faintly, worn smooth, where countless hands, countless robes may have brushed against it, yet no records remain to tell us who truly sat there, a king, a priest, or something that could not be called human at all. The ivory curves in patterns of curling lines, strange motifs etched by hands long gone. To sit upon it, one would find themselves dwarfed by its high back, as if the throne were not designed for comfort, but for presence. And though the palace around it has collapsed and burned and been rebuilt again in layers of time, the throne endured, untouched, unsinged, preserved when all else fell to ruin. That is why they whisper that it burned without flame. Not in fire that consumes wood and flesh, but in something older, an invisible blaze of ritual, sacrifice, and power. The throne holds no scorch marks, and yet those who study it claim that every surface glows faintly, as if it still smolders in a way the eye cannot see. Legends say that Minos, the king of Crete, was not merely a ruler, but a judge among the dead, seated at the edge of Hades after his passing. If his throne in Knossos survived centuries of ruin, might it not be because it was never entirely of this world? Some claim it was fashioned as a gate, a seat where the mortal ruler became a channel between realms. The ivory itself, once belonging to beasts slain across seas, was carved into shape and bound with offerings, its curves echoing horns, tusks, and the moon's pale arc. Sit upon the throne, they say, and you will hear not the voices of men, but the low roar of the labyrinth itself. Some claim the sound is like a heartbeat, slow and deep, as though the palace itself still dreams. Others say it is the faint tread of hooves, the echo of the Minotaur, bound in shadow, walking circles beneath the earth. Archaeologists found the seat in 1900 when the ruins of Knossos were first uncovered. They brushed away layers of soil, expecting fragments, and instead revealed a throne whole, complete, waiting. Some said it was too perfect, too untouched, as though it had been waiting not for discovery but for return. Even then, under the bright Cretan sun, the ivory looked pale, almost damp, like something pulled not from stone but from flesh. It became clear that this was no ordinary seat of rule. Unlike the great thrones of Egypt or Mesopotamia, laden with gold and jewels, this one was quiet, austere, made of something that fades faster than stone, and yet it endured longer. Why? What flame burned around it without consuming? Some suggest that rituals of water and fire passed endlessly before it. Knossos is a palace of contradictions, labyrinth yet palace, temple yet dwelling, fortress yet sanctuary. Here priests may have poured libations, led bulls to sacrifice, let blood run into channels cut deep into the floor. Fire was kindled, water spilled, smoke rose, chants echoed, and through it all the throne remained, absorbing prayer like a sponge absorbs water. Its ivory whiteness, untouched by soot, may have been preserved by ritual itself, but others whisper that it survived because it was not meant to perish. A throne bound not by kingship, but by myth. For Minos was son of Zeus, they say, and his palace was a reflection of heaven's order below. When he judged men, whether in life or death, he sat upon a seat that glowed with divine permanence. Fire could not claim it because it was not fashioned for earth alone. Step closer, they say, and you will notice how narrow the chamber is. The throne sits against the wall, flanked by benches, as though ceremonies unfolded before it. Perhaps those who entered offered words or oaths, their voices trembling as the one seated listened in silence. No crown remains, no scepter, only the ivory, waiting, its presence enough to command. And still, it burned. Not with flame of wood, nor torch, but with that unseen fire that devours certainty and leaves only questions. Every visitor feels it differently. Some feel warmth against their palms. Some hear faint whispers when their back is turned. Some dream of bulls, of spirals, of seas rising and falling endlessly. The throne is quiet, yes, but silence itself can speak. Was it Minos himself who sat there, ruling in flesh before judging in death? Or was it a priestess, as some scholars claim, conducting rituals older than kingship, channeling the voices of gods? The palace murals show women in flowing robes, snakes coiled in their hands, dancing with solemn grace. Perhaps the throne was never a king's at all, but hers, the seat of a priestess who burned without flame, whose body became the offering in ecstatic ritual. And if that were true, then the throne is more than ivory, it is bone. It is remembrance of sacrifice, carved into permanence. Even now, in the museum where it sits preserved, travelers say they feel it, that odd heaviness, that invisible flicker, like heat that cannot be seen. Some walk away quickly, some linger too long, their eyes fixed upon its pale surface, as if waiting for it to move. The throne of Minos, the ivory throne of Knossos, is more than an artifact. It is a paradox, fragile yet enduring, silent yet filled with echoes, burned yet unmarked. It remains a riddle carved into ivory, seated at the center of a palace that was itself a labyrinth of myth. And so it waits, as it has always waited, for king, for priestess, for wanderer, for anyone brave enough to sit where silence burns hotter than fire. The throne that burned without flame, the seat of ivory, pale as ash, yet untouched, a memory, a warning, a story without end. The mask that devoured the sun. Beneath the high plateaus of central Mexico, in a city that once thrived with avenues wide enough for processions of priests, warriors, and pilgrims, there lies a relic that whispers through both silence and shadow. The mask that devoured the sun. Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born, is a site whose pyramids still pierce the sky like frozen prayers, where the avenue of the dead stretches in solemn symmetry, and where fragments of painted murals cling to stone as though refusing to surrender their voices to time. Amid the ruins and dust, the solar mask, carved from greenstone and polished obsidian, still carries a mystery vast enough to swallow centuries whole. The mask was not a mere decoration, it was not a trinket to be worn in everyday life, nor a face to hide behind in carnival. It was something else entirely, a vessel, a face of the cosmos, an artifact woven into the city's ritual heartbeat. It was said to shimmer like the dawn when torchlight met its smooth surface, and to darken like an eclipse when shadows claimed it. To look upon it was to feel both life and death entwined. Scholars debate whether it was intended as a likeness of the gods, an emblem of rulers, or a bridge between humanity and the unyielding fire of the heavens. Yet all agree, it was not made to be silent. Imagine the city when the mask first gleamed in ritual. The air would have smelled of copal incense, resinous and sweet, spiraling into the twilight. Drums and conch-shell trumpets would have pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth, rising and falling in waves. Dancers in feathered headdresses might have circled the pyramid steps, their movements echoing both celestial cycles and earthly battles. At the center of it all, the mask would have stood, resting on a shrine, carried by a priest, or placed above a body of the newly dead. Its eyes, hollow and yet alive, would have caught the flicker of fire and the reflection of the setting sun. And in those moments, the mask was not an object, it was a presence. To understand the solar mask, one must first understand Teotihuacan itself. Unlike many cities, its builders left no written records, no chronicles carved in stone to boast of kings or dynasties. Instead, they built monuments of such scale and precision that the city itself became the text, a book written in pyramids, plazas, and shadows. The Pyramid of the Sun towers even today, a mountain of stone aligned with cosmic paths. The Pyramid of the Moon, smaller yet still commanding, crowns the northern end of the Great Avenue. Between them stretch palaces, temples, and dwellings, some painted with jaguars, owls, and serpents. Within this silent architecture, the mask belonged, as if it were one more line in the vast unwritten scripture of the city. Archaeologists have found several masks at Teotihuacan, often buried with the dead, or hidden within temple offerings. Many are made of greenstone, jadeite, serpentine, or obsidian, their surfaces polished smooth, their features carved with serene restraint. Unlike the more expressive art of later Aztec masks, these Teotihuacan faces are calm, symmetrical, timeless. They do not smile, nor grimace. They watch. They wait. The solar mask stands among these, but it is distinct in its association with fire and sun. Some suggest it may have represented Tonatiuh, the sun deity, whose open jaws in later Aztec imagery demanded sacrifice. Others believe it may have been tied to the ruler priests themselves, who embodied the cycle of day and night in ritual roles. And still others whisper that it was not the face of a god or man, but of the city itself. Teotihuacan given a visage. Consider the craftsmanship. Each line of the mask was cut with tools of stone, bone, and obsidian blades sharper than steel. Each surface was ground and polished by hand, taking months, perhaps years. To hold such a mask was to hold hundreds of hours of labor, generations of tradition, and the weight of belief. And the choice of materials was deliberate. Greenstone, shimmering like fertile maize fields, spoke of life, renewal, and vegetation. Obsidian, dark and volcanic, was the gift of fire from the earth's heart. To combine these in a single face was to combine life and death, growth and destruction, earth and sky. When we imagine the mask in ritual use, we must also imagine the soundscape of the city. Teotihuacan was not silent. It was alive with voices, footsteps, markets, music, and the cries of worshippers. On days of ceremony, the mask may have been lifted high for thousands to see, reflecting the light of torches, fire, or sun. Its gaze would not have been warm, but piercing, steady, unblinking. For the people below, to see the mask might have been to see their own fate, a reminder that life was fragile, that the sun demanded payment, that cycles of time would consume them all. There is a legend, whispered by later Mexica Aztec poets, that in Teotihuacan, the gods once gathered to sacrifice themselves so that the sun could rise. The city, they said, was the birthplace of the fifth sun, the world in which we now live. If such myths carried even a shadow of truth, the mask may have been tied to that ancient drama, not merely a relic of ritual, but a participant in the cosmic story. To wear the mask, or even to stand before it, was to join that endless cycle of sacrifice and renewal, where gods gave their lives to ignite the sky, and humans gave their blood to keep it burning. Yet, for all its weight of myth and meaning, the mask remains silent in the earth today. It lies within museum walls, displayed under gentle light, separated from incense, drums, and flame. Visitors gaze at it through glass, marveling at its smoothness, its symmetry, its enigmatic calm. They read the plaques, they take photographs, but few can imagine the living city that once surrounded it, or the voices that once sang to it. The mask has devoured not only the sun, but also the centuries between its birth and its rediscovery. There is something haunting about a mask. Unlike a statue which shows a body entire, a mask is only a face. It invites someone to wear it, to let it merge with their own features. It transforms the wearer, dissolves the boundary between person and persona. In ritual, the priest who lifted the solar mask may no longer have been seen as himself, but as the god, the ancestor, the city, or the sun itself. The mask consumed identity as surely as it consumed the light, and in that act of transformation, the line between mortal and divine blurred. Some archaeologists have suggested that masks like this one may never have been worn at all. Their weight, their fragility, and their lack of straps suggest they were instead meant to rest upon the dead, laid upon skulls, merged with the departed. If so, then the solar mask may have belonged not to the living but to the deceased, guiding them through the underworld, illuminating their journey with borrowed fire. In this way, the mask that devoured the sun may also have devoured death, offering its bearer a face beyond the grave. The artistry of Teotihuacan reveals a mind deeply attuned to cycles of day and night, of maize planting and harvest, of life and death, of fire and water. The mask, in its serene and eternal gaze, embodies these cycles. It does not change expression, yet it changes with the light. In dawn it glows, in dusk it darkens, in firelight it flickers, in shadow it disappears. It teaches that nothing is fixed, that all is transformation. As centuries passed, Teotihuacan declined. Its palaces crumbled, its murals faded, its people dispersed. By the time the Aztecs came upon its ruins, it was already ancient, already wrapped in legend. They gave it the name we know today, Teotihuacan, and they walked its silent avenues with awe. To them, the city was a place where gods had moved, where the sun had been born, where relics like the mask still carried echoes of forgotten ceremonies. Even they, masters of their own empire, bowed to the silence of the mask. And so the solar mask lingers in our time. It lingers as a reminder that artifacts are not inert. They are vessels of memory, carriers of voice. They are not only objects of art, but also fragments of ritual, belief, and fear. When we gaze at the mask today, we may see only a beautiful face, symmetrical and calm. But if we close our eyes, if we listen to the silence behind the glass, we may hear something else: the faint beat of drums, the cry of conch shells, the murmur of voices offering prayers to the sun. The mask devoured the sun, but in its silence, it also devours us. It draws us in, strips away our modern certainties, and reminds us that beneath the skin of history lies an unending mystery. The city is gone. The priests are dust. The pyramids remain, but even they crumble. Yet the mask endures, holding its gaze, watching without blinking, carrying secrets it will never surrender. And so the next time you imagine Teotihuacan beneath the vast Mexican sky, picture the solar mask glowing in ritual fire. Picture its hollow eyes gazing into both the living and the dead. Picture the moment when silence fell upon the avenue, and the mask, unblinking, seemed to consume the very light around it. In that moment, the mask was not stone, it was not artifact. It was the sun itself, waiting, devouring, eternal. The crown that sang in gold, in the shifting sands of Egypt, where the wind still carries whispers of forgotten names. There lies a crown that has outlived its princess, its dynasty, and even the very gods it was meant to honor. The crown of Princess Sithathorionet, daughter of a pharaoh, whose shadow once stretched across the desert, was not forged simply to rest upon her head. It was a crown that shimmered like the rising sun, an object that carried with it the echo of an ancient melody, a hymn of gold, a song that never faded. Those who gazed upon it swore that it seemed almost alive, as if the gold itself had been taught to sing in silence. The crown belonged to a princess of the Middle Kingdom, around the time of Pharaoh Senusret II. Though the details of her life remain thin as reed paper washed by the Nile, her name, Sithathorionet, translates into a phrase that rolls softly from the tongue: daughter of Hathor, lady of Dendera. Already her very name bound her not only to the mortal palace where she once walked, but also to the goddess of music, dance, and beauty. And so perhaps it was inevitable that her crown would not merely adorn her, but would breathe the music of eternity. The story of the crown begins, like many things in Egypt, with the earth itself. Beneath the surface of the desert were veins of gold so pure that they seemed less like metal and more like frozen sunlight. Egyptian miners, their bodies bent with exhaustion, chipped away at these veins, carrying fragments of divine brilliance up from the shadows of the earth. These fragments would be melted, hammered, and coaxed into form by goldsmiths whose skills were whispered about as if they were sorcerers. In the glow of their forges, sparks flew like stars, and from those stars the crown was born. It was not a simple circlet. It was woven with intricate patterns, studded with inlays of carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise, stones that carried the power of the heavens, the blood of the earth, and the shimmer of the river Nile. The band curved in delicate symmetry, repeating patterns of rosettes and lotus blossoms, each shape whispering prayers of rebirth and eternal life. The crown was not an ornament, it was a spell, one cast in gold and stone. When Princess Sithethorionet placed it upon her head, perhaps during ceremonies within the palace of Lahun, the crown caught the light in such a way that it seemed to hum with radiance. Courtiers must have paused in awe as beams of reflected sunlight danced across the walls like music made visible. It was said that the crown carried its own sound, not a sound heard with the ears, but with the heart, a vibration that reminded those who beheld it that they were in the presence of something beyond human craft. And yet, like all treasures in Egypt, the crown was not made only for the fleeting splendor of earthly ceremonies. Its true purpose was for eternity. For when Sithethorionet died, perhaps still in youth, perhaps after years of quiet luxury, the crown was placed among her funerary treasures, hidden within a chamber near the pyramid of Senusret II. There, it would wait. It would outlast dynasties, invaders, and even the slow collapse of Egypt's glory. The desert, patient and impartial, became its guardian. Centuries passed. Names of kings were erased, temples crumbled, sandstorms buried entire cities. Yet the crown endured. Silent, unyielding, gleaming softly in the darkness where it was entombed. It was as if the crown itself was singing to the silence, a hymn to eternity, each note struck not by sound, but by survival. When archaeologists uncovered the crown in the early 20th century, they were not prepared for the brilliance that met them. The tomb of Princess Sithethorionet had been robbed long ago, yet by some fortune, this crown had escaped the thieves' grasp. Resting in its hiding place, it seemed untouched by time, its gold still glowing as if it had been hammered yesterday. Those who first laid eyes on it described a feeling difficult to put into words, a shiver that passed not through the skin but the spirit, as if the crown itself was greeting them with its quiet song. The modern world could catalog its weight, measure its diameter, analyze its gold content, and trace the trade routes of its inlaid stones. Yet none of those things explained why the crown seemed to possess a presence. Visitors to the museum where it is now displayed often linger longer than they intend. Some say they feel a warmth radiating from it. Others claim that if they close their eyes while standing near it, they can hear the faint strumming of a harp or the lilting tones of an ancient hymn. Perhaps these are simply tricks of the mind, the product of suggestion and imagination. Or perhaps not. For the Egyptians believed that objects, especially those made for burial, contained a piece of the soul, not only of the owner, but of the divine powers they invoked. If this is true, then the crown of Sithethorionet does not merely survive as an artifact. It lives as a fragment of music, a note sustained across thousands of years, never fading, never ending. Imagine the crown in its time, the court of the Middle Kingdom filled with painted walls, the rustle of linen garments, the smell of lotus oil in the air. The princess, adorned with her golden crown, walking with measured grace, her footsteps echoing across the polished stone floors. Perhaps she wore it during a festival honoring Hathor, where dancers spun and musicians plucked harps and flutes. The crown would have caught every flicker of torchlight, every burst of sun at dawn. It was not only a crown, it was a performer in the dance of light, singing without sound. But there is another possibility, that the crown was never meant to be worn often, if at all. That it was instead a piece made for death, for that eternal journey where the soul must cross the underworld and stand before Osiris. In that realm where darkness threatened to swallow the spirit, the crown's glow would have been a lantern, its golden hum a guide through silence, carrying the princess safely into the fields of eternity. And so the crown has two songs. One for the living, dazzling and radiant, filling the halls of men with its golden music, and one for the dead, soft and unending, carrying a soul through the silent night toward the dawn of eternity. Both songs still seem to linger, fused together in the object itself. That is why it unsettles, why it enchants, for in truth, the crown of Princess Sithethorio is not just a relic, it is a voice of gold, echoing from a forgotten palace, carrying the memory of a princess whose name might otherwise have been lost. Her crown continues to sing long after her bones turn to dust. And though no harpist plucks its strings, though no priestess chants the hymns of Hathor by its side, the song of the crown endures. It waits in silence for those who can still hear. The jewel that watched the night. In the hush of medieval Europe, where abbeys rose like anchors against the dark sea of time, there exists a jewel that did not glitter only in daylight, but seemed to carry within it a vision of the night itself. The Lothair crystal, cut from rock crystal and carved with patient hands more than 1,000 years ago, is not a crown, not a weapon, not a reliquary, but a window through which emperors peered, monks prayed, and kings measured their destiny. A jewel that did not merely reflect light, but trapped stories inside its flawless body. And for centuries, it was said that when the halls of power slept, the crystal kept watch. The story of the Lothair crystal begins not in France, where it was treasured, but in the quarries of the earth itself. Rock crystal, clear quartz born in the slow breath of mountains, was considered the most precious of stones by many in the early medieval world. To the people of the Carolingian age, who believed crystals were frozen ice touched by heaven, they were relics of eternity. A piece of the frozen divine, clear and incorruptible, untarnished by time or decay. What better material than for an emperor who wished to proclaim his rule, not just over men, but over the very order of heaven? The crystal was carved in the mid-9th century during the reign of Lothair II, grandson of Charlemagne. It bears his name not because it belonged to him as a trinket, but because it was created to speak of him, to embody his reign, and perhaps to protect it. Into the flawless oval of the crystal, artisans cut a story in miniature. The story of Susanna, drawn from the apocryphal book of Daniel. It is a tale of false accusation, of virtue tested, of justice preserved by divine intervention. Susanna, wife of a wealthy man, was spied upon by corrupt elders. When she refused their advances, they accused her falsely of adultery. She was brought to trial, and only the wisdom of the prophet Daniel, who separated the elders and questioned them apart, revealed their lies. Susanna was spared, her name cleared, her virtue preserved. On the surface, this was a pious story, carved for devotion. Yet to the court of Lothair, it was something more. For Lothair's reign was riddled with accusations, with disputes over marriage, legitimacy, and the tangled inheritance of an empire. To hold in one's hand a crystal that displayed the triumph of truth over falsehood was no idle ornament, it was both symbol and prayer. Look closely at the carving, and you see the figures etched in astonishing detail. Susanna, standing in grace, her veil carved as if it were gossamer. The elders, their gestures filled with malice, leaning toward her with whispering lips. Daniel, raising his hand in judgment, his youthful face serene, all of it rendered not with paint or gold, but with the simple play of light through carved planes of quartz. When sunlight struck the crystal, the images glowed with a depth that no parchment could hold. It was as if a vision had been trapped inside stone. The crystal was mounted in gold and adorned with settings of jewels. It was not meant for casual use. It was carried in ceremonies, placed upon altars, and held before kings as they swore their oaths. Imagine the scene, the dim light of a Carolingian chapel, candles flickering against the cold stone, incense rising like mist. A bishop lifts the crystal, its inner figures catching the firelight, casting faint reflections upon the vaulted ceiling, and the king kneels before it, swearing not only to men, but to the eternal story sealed within it, that lies will be exposed, that virtue will endure, that justice will be done. But the Lothair crystal carried with it another layer of power, secrecy. For while it was a public symbol, it was also a private jewel, passed from hand to hand in hushed moments, studied in candlelight by rulers plagued with doubt. In the long nights of winter, when the court grew still, and even the torches seemed to burn low, the crystal gleamed faintly on its cushion of silk. Guards patrolled the halls. Courtiers slept uneasily. But the crystal did not sleep, it watched. Its figures, fixed in eternal judgment, stood silent witness to every whisper, every plot, every broken oath. For this reason, stories grew around it. Some said the crystal could expose a liar if held before his eyes, that the light within it would darken, showing the truth. Others believed that Susanna herself, carved in chastity and defiance, would protect the women of the court from slander. And a few whispered that Daniel, forever young within the jewel, listened to prayers in the night and carried them to God. Whether these were pious fictions or not, the crystal became less a piece of art and more a companion of power. The centuries turned. Dynasties rose and fell. The empire of Charlemagne split and shattered. The Lothair crystal passed from hand to hand, kings, dukes, bishops, abbeys. It found its way to France, where it was preserved with reverence. Though wars raged and invaders stormed, though relics were plundered and treasures melted, somehow the crystal survived. It was too strange, too singular, to be destroyed. When scholars of later centuries studied it, they were struck not only by its beauty, but by its survival. A delicate jewel, yet unbroken. A work of fragile quartz, yet it had endured more than iron crowns and steel swords. It was as if the crystal itself carried the same virtue as Susanna, threatened, accused, nearly lost, but ultimately preserved. And so its legend grew, the jewel that never slept, the jewel that watched. Visitors today who gaze upon it behind the glass of a museum case often describe a curious sensation. The figures, though small, are vivid. It feels less like looking at a carving and more like looking through a window into a moment that is still alive. The transparency of the quartz makes the figures seem suspended, as though they could move if the light shifted. And for some there is even the faint impression of being watched in return. not by the figures of Susanna or Daniel, but by the jewel itself, a cold, clear gaze, ancient and unblinking. Perhaps this is imagination, or perhaps it is the nature of all great relics, to carry with them not only the labor of the craftsman and the prayers of the faithful, but also the weight of every eye that has ever looked upon them. For more than 1,000 years, men and women have sought the crystal's truth, its justice, its silent watch. The crystal has absorbed all of it, and so now, when we stand before it, we too are drawn into its long vigil. At night, in the museum's silence, when even the hum of visitors has faded and the lights dim, one wonders what the Lothair crystal remembers. Does it recall the day it first shone in the hands of a Carolingian priest? Does it remember the whispered prayers of queens who feared slander? Does it still glow faintly with the oaths of kings? Perhaps it does. Perhaps, like the frozen ice it was once believed to be, it holds within it not just images but time itself. And so the Lothair crystal remains what it has always been, a jewel that does not rest, a jewel that keeps its own counsel, a jewel that watches. Through empire and ruin, through night and dawn, it waits. And when we gaze into it, we see not only Susanna's story, but our own reflection, tested, judged, held within the unyielding clarity of stone. The jewel that watched the night still watches, and it will watch long after we are gone. The cup that promised the gods. Beneath the rolling hills of Burgundy, where rivers coil through valleys like silver threads, and the wind still whispers through ancient forests, a grave was opened in 1953 that revealed not merely a burial, but a revelation. Within that chamber, the world glimpsed a treasure that seemed to have been poured straight from myth. The Cantharos of Vix, a vessel so vast, so intricate, so utterly beyond the ordinary craft of its time, that it seemed less an object for mortals, and more an offering made to the gods themselves. The Cantharos, or crater, as scholars sometimes call it, is a bronze cup, unlike any other. Standing taller than a man's waist, capable of holding over 1,000 liters of liquid, it dwarfs the drinking vessels of Greece, where it was made, and astonishes those who know the modest customs of the Celtic world, where it was buried. To find such a thing in a tomb in France, far from the Mediterranean, was to uncover not merely an artifact but a mystery. How did it come here? Who owned it? And why was it laid to rest in silence, as though waiting for us to rediscover it more than 2 millennia later? The vessel was discovered in the burial of a woman, now known as the Lady of Vix. She was no ordinary woman. Her grave, dating to the 6th century BCE, was among the richest ever uncovered in Europe. Alongside the cup lay treasures of gold and amber, weapons of prestige, ornaments of unimaginable delicacy. She was laid out as though she were queen, priestess, ruler, or all of these at once. And at the center of it all, like the heart of a silent ritual, stood the Cantharos. To describe it in detail is to lose oneself in awe. The cup rises over 5 feet tall, its body hammered from a single sheet of bronze, so thin and so perfectly balanced that it seems impossible it could have been made without modern tools. The handles are cast separately, each one curling like the horns of a bull, ending in a sculpted Gorgon's head, her eyes wide, her mouth twisted into the grimace of warding. Around the rim of the vessel marches a procession of warriors, a frieze of tiny figures, each one armed, each one advancing, carved with precision into the bronze. Horses, men, shields, chariots, an entire army reduced to miniature, as if the vessel itself contained not only wine but the very story of battle and triumph. And yet, for all its grandeur, the Cantharos was never used. No traces of wine stain its interior, no wear marks mar its handles. It was made not for feasting, but for eternity. A gift, perhaps, intended to bridge the worlds of the living and the divine. To hold such a vessel was to proclaim dominion not only over the earth but over ritual itself. But let us linger upon its journey. This was no common trade good, carried casually along merchant routes. The Cantharos was made in Greece, likely in a workshop of Magna Graecia, in southern Italy, where Greek craftsmen mingled with local patrons. From there it traveled northward, through valleys and rivers, across mountains, into the heart of Celtic lands. To transport such a piece would have taken not days but months, perhaps years. It was carried not for silver or barter, but as a gift, a diplomatic offering, a token of alliance, or perhaps tribute demanded by a people whose power extended further than we imagine. The Celts of Burgundy were not yet the tribes that Julius Caesar would later encounter. These were the Hallstatt people, builders of fortified hill settlements, traders of salt and iron, masters of long-distance exchange. They sought not only wealth but symbols of prestige, objects that could raise one chieftain above another, that could mark a ruler as chosen by destiny. And so, when the Cantharos came to them, they recognized it not as a drinking cup, but as a throne in metal, a divine emblem, a vessel whose emptiness was more powerful than any feast. When the Lady of Vix died, the Cantharos was placed in her tomb as the central symbol of her passage. Around it were arranged other treasures, a gold torque of immense weight, bracelets and fibulae of bronze, imported vessels of silver and ceramic, but none commanded attention like the cup. It stood not beside her, but above her, as if to say that she herself was the one destined to pour for the gods. Imagine the funeral. The mourners gathered on the hillside, the air thick with smoke from offerings, the sound of horns echoing in the valley. Warriors laid down their weapons, women tore their hair in lamentation, and priests whispered words of passage. The cantharos gleamed in the firelight, its bronze reflecting the flames as though it burned with its own inner light. When at last the tomb was sealed, the vessel remained upright, patient, eternal, its mouth open to the darkness, a promise unfulfilled, a prayer waiting to be heard. For centuries the hill above Vix was quiet. Seasons turned. The Celts vanished into history, replaced by Rome, by kingdoms, by nations unborn when the vessel was buried. The cantharos remained beneath the soil, untouched, unbroken, a giant asleep in the earth. When it was uncovered in the mid-20th century, those who beheld it struggled for words. Archaeologists gasped not only at its scale but at its perfection. How had it survived, thin bronze, uncrushed by the weight of earth above it? How had its delicate handles endured 2,500 years? To see it lifted from the ground was to feel the weight of time itself, as though the gods to whom it was promised had at last returned it to the world of men. Even now, displayed in a museum, the cantharos retains its aura. Visitors stand before it in silence, their reflections warped in its polished surface. Children crane their necks upward, astonished that such a thing could exist. Scholars debate its origins endlessly, tracing every line of its decoration, every hammer mark upon its body. Yet none can fully explain why it was made, or for whom, or how it found its way into the grave of a Celtic woman in distant France. Some say it was never meant for mortals at all, that it was forged as an offering to the Olympian gods, but diverted somehow into human hands, carried north by ambition or greed. Others whisper that it was intended not for feasts but for libations, to pour wine or blood upon the earth in rituals of immense power. And still others believe that the Lady of Vix herself was more than queen, more than chieftain, that she was priestess, oracle, divine intermediary, and that the cup was her instrument, her key to the realm of the unseen. There are legends, too, born after its discovery. Villagers speak of dreams in which the cantharos overflows, spilling wine that runs like rivers across the land. Others say that when the moonlight strikes its surface, one can see not one's own reflection, but the faces of those long dead, staring back from the bronze, as though waiting for the ritual to resume. What is certain is that the cantharos is no ordinary vessel. It is a paradox. Vast yet fragile, empty yet overflowing, silent yet speaking in a voice that carries across centuries. To stand before it is to feel both the grandeur of human craft and the smallness of human life. For here is an object that outlasted kingdoms, languages, and empires. The Lady of Vix is gone. Her people are gone, but the cup remains, still open, still waiting, still promising. Perhaps it waits for a god to whom it was once destined. Perhaps it waits for us, who can only marvel to understand. For now it is the same as it was in the dark tomb. A vessel of bronze, mouth agape, watching the world in silence. A cup that promised the gods, and perhaps, still does. The coin that waited for a kingdom. The crocide, a gleaming gold coin from the ancient kingdom of Lydia, carries with it whispers of wealth, power, and the fleeting nature of kingdoms long gone. It is not merely a piece of currency, it is a vessel of history, a silent witness to the ambitions, betrayals, and innovations of a civilization that existed over 2.5 millennia ago. When we hold such an artifact, the metal itself seems to hum with stories. Stories of the hands that minted it, the merchants who traded it, and the rulers who saw in it not only a means of trade, but a symbol of enduring authority. In the 6th century BCE, Lydia was a land of contrasts, where fertile plains stretched to meet rugged hills, and trade routes connected the Aegean to the interior of Anatolia. It was in this landscape that King Croesus, famed for his immense wealth, commissioned coins that would forever change human history. Unlike the primitive barter systems of his neighbors, the Croesus represented a standardized value, stamped in pure gold, a promise of security and trust. But beyond its economic function, the coin was a symbol, a tangible emblem of the king's dominion and vision for a unified economic identity. Each coin bore the lion and bull motif, an image carefully chosen to signify power, dominance, and divine favor. The lion, fierce and untamed, represented the strength of the king, while the bull symbolized the abundance of the land, the wealth that flowed from soil, river, and pasture alike. Together, these images were not mere decoration, they were a coded message to anyone who held the coin. You possess the authority of Lydia in your hands. The production of these coins was itself a marvel. Gold was sourced from rivers and mines, refined and weighed with painstaking care. Skilled artisans impressed dyes onto thin sheets of gold, leaving their mark as a permanent record of a moment in time. Every curve, Every edge, every motif told a story of craftsmanship that combined artistry with precision. When the coin changed hands, it was not just money being exchanged, it was a story traveling across towns, marketplaces, and kingdoms. Traders carried the krausside from Lydia to Greek city-states and beyond, where it became a token of trust, a universally recognized symbol of value in an era before minted currency was commonplace. Yet the krausside was also a silent observer of human ambition and folly. In the hands of Croesus it symbolized unchallenged power, a fortune built on conquest and trade. But power, as history reminds us, is never eternal. The coin eventually witnessed the fall of Lydia to Cyrus the Great, the rise of empires far larger than Croesus could have imagined. Coins that once proclaimed his wealth and influence were melted, repurposed, and scattered across regions, becoming relics whose original purpose faded, but whose stories endured. In this way, the krausside is not merely an object, it is a fragment of human ambition frozen in gold. The coin also reflects the deeper cultural intersections of the era. Lydia was a crossroads of peoples and ideas, where Greeks, Phrygians, and Anatolians mingled in marketplaces, temples, and courts. The krausside circulated among them all, a silent ambassador of economic innovation, spreading the concept of standardized currency far beyond Lydia's borders. Each touch of the coin connects us with individuals who lived thousands of years ago, merchants weighing it in their hands, kings considering the implications of its value, travelers marveling at its craftsmanship. The coin carries echoes of laughter, of haggling voices, of the prayers and worries of those who sought to survive and prosper in an ancient world full of uncertainty. Even today, when a krausside is unearthed in an archaeological dig or preserved in a museum, it seems to carry with it a breath of its original world. The gold glimmers as if holding the sun's warmth from centuries past, and the motifs whisper of lions prowling ancient plains and bulls grazing under a golden sky. It is a coin that embodies the passage of time, the rise and fall of empires, the enduring human fascination with wealth and security. Scholars study it, collectors treasure it, yet in its quiet way the coin remains a storyteller, waiting for those willing to listen. The story of the krausside is also a story of innovation. Lydia's introduction of minted coins was revolutionary, setting a precedent that would ripple through history. It influenced the Greeks, Persians, and ultimately the entire Mediterranean world, laying the foundation for economies that continue to operate on the principles of standardized currency. But the coin is more than an economic milestone. It is a reflection of human ingenuity, of our ability to take raw materials and transform them into symbols of trust, artistry, and civilization itself. Every scratch, every patina, every worn edge is a testament to the countless hands that handled it, each adding their own subtle imprint to its journey through time. Holding a krausside in your mind's eye, one imagines the markets of Sardis, the capital of Lydia, bustling with traders from distant lands, each coin a promise, a bargaining chip, a portable fortune. The lion and bull are not just images, they are emblems of a worldview, a culture that prized strength, prosperity, and divine sanction. The coin speaks across millennia, reminding us of the ambitions, fears, and dreams of a civilization that, though vanished, left behind something golden and enduring. In this way, the krausside waits silently, even today, for those who seek to understand its stories. It is not merely currency, it is memory, it is legacy, it is the echo of a kingdom that once held sway over vast lands. Each coin is a fragment of a greater narrative, a tangible connection to an era when kings and merchants, gods and mortals, all intersected in the golden glow of a metal that promised not just wealth, but immortality through memory. The coin has waited, and it continues to wait, for the curious, the thoughtful, and the patient, those who will allow it to speak once more, whispering across the ages of a kingdom that rose, shone, and ultimately transformed into legend. The krausside, after witnessing the grandeur of Lydia's markets and the ambitions of King Croesus, began a journey that would stretch far beyond the borders of its origin. Once exchanged in the hands of merchants, it became a silent traveler, crossing seas and deserts, moving from city to city, from kingdom to kingdom, carrying with it a story that no scribe could fully capture. Each transaction it passed through added a layer of narrative, a whisper of human experience, as if the coin itself absorbed the hopes and fears of those who possessed it. To trace its path is to trace the veins of human civilization itself, following the roots of trade, conquest, and cultural exchange that defined an entire era. In the Greek city-states, the krausside's influence was profound. Its standardized weight and purity set a benchmark for monetary systems that would endure for centuries. Traders marveled at its consistency, while philosophers and statesmen debated its significance. The coin was more than gold, it was a new idea, a representation of trust and societal cohesion. Greek artisans and die-makers, inspired by the precision and symbolism of the Lydian coins, began crafting their own currency, borrowing motifs, refining techniques, and embedding messages of city pride, civic identity, and divine favor into the designs. In this way, the Croside's impact extended far beyond its immediate economic utility. It shaped thought, culture, and governance, influencing the very framework of the societies that received it. Yet, despite its widespread circulation, the coin never lost the aura of its origin. The image of the lion and bull continued to speak across generations, a silent testimony to the land and people from which it came. The lion prowled, eternal and vigilant, while the bull stood as a reminder of abundance, a silent symbol of the interconnectedness of power, prosperity, and natural law. For centuries, these images communicated more than wealth. They transmitted a worldview, a subtle philosophy encoded in metal, reflecting the Lydians' understanding of their own world and the cosmos around them. Beyond the Greek world, the Croside traveled eastward into the vast Persian Empire. Here it encountered new rulers, new traditions, and new forms of exchange. The Persians, adept at integrating the customs and systems of the lands they conquered, recognized the value of Lydia's innovation. The coins were accepted, replicated, and adapted, each iteration carrying hints of its Lydian ancestry, while reflecting Persian aesthetics and authority. In markets stretching from Sardis to Susa, the Crusade became a bridge between cultures, a tangible proof that ideas, like gold, could flow freely across boundaries, binding diverse peoples together in a shared economic and symbolic language. The coin's journey was not without peril. Empires rose and fell, cities were sacked, and trade routes shifted as kingdoms waged war and alliances shifted. Yet, through all this upheaval, the Crusade endured. Its gold resisted decay, its images remained legible, and its story continued to unfold. Archaeologists who unearth these coins today uncover more than metal. They uncover evidence of a world interconnected in ways both subtle and profound. Each coin carries the memory of merchants haggling over its value, of kings inspecting it as a measure of loyalty and tribute, of travelers clutching it as a portable fortune. In these small, unassuming discs of gold lies the pulse of human history, encoded in metal and symbol. The Croside's influence was not confined to the ancient world alone. Centuries later, scholars and collectors in Europe and the Middle East rediscovered these coins, marveling at their craftsmanship, their historical significance, and their enduring beauty. Museums displayed them behind glass, while private collectors treasured them as symbols of human ingenuity. Yet even in modern times, when placed in a hand or examined under a magnifying lens, the coin seems to hum with the energy of the centuries it has traversed. It remains alive in a sense, a conduit between past and present, a reminder of the continuity of human ambition and creativity. In addition to its historical and cultural resonance, the Croside also offers lessons in economics and governance. By standardizing value, the Lydians laid the groundwork for financial systems that would evolve into the sophisticated economies we know today. They demonstrated that trust, codified in a tangible object, could facilitate complex trade networks, create wealth, and stabilize society. The coin embodies the principles of consistency, reliability, and shared belief, the very foundations of any functioning economy. Each transaction it mediated was a reaffirmation of these principles, an ongoing dialogue between individuals, cities, and empires that transcended language, culture, and time. The journey of the Crusade also underscores the fragility and resilience of human institutions. Croesus, who once held unchallenged power, saw his kingdom fall to Cyrus and the Persian Empire. Yet the coin outlived the ambitions of kings, the rise and fall of dynasties, and the shifting borders of empires. In its endurance, it became a symbol of continuity amidst change. A reminder that even as human endeavors falter, artifacts can carry memory forward, preserving the essence of civilizations that have otherwise vanished. The coin's story is, in essence, the story of humanity itself, our aspirations, our failures, and our desire to leave something tangible behind for those who follow. Archaeological discoveries of Crosides in distant lands continue to fascinate scholars. Coins have been found far from Lydia, in Greece, Turkey, Italy, and beyond, often in contexts that speak of trade, tribute, and cultural exchange. Each find expands our understanding of the ancient world, revealing networks of communication and commerce that connected disparate civilizations in ways that continue to surprise and inspire. The lion and bull motif, once a localized symbol of power and prosperity, becomes a universal emblem, recognized and respected across regions and generations. Holding a Croside in one's hand today, one cannot help but feel a profound connection to the past. The coin is small, yet its significance is immense. It represents the dreams of a king who sought to unify and stabilize his kingdom, the ingenuity of artisans who created it, the trust of merchants who relied upon it, and the enduring curiosity of those who study it today. It embodies a story that spans centuries, geographies, and cultures, a story that is still unfolding as each new generation encounters it and reflects upon its meaning. Even as modern economies and technologies transform the way we understand value, The crowside reminds us that the principles of trust, innovation, and connection are timeless. Its gold, unyielding and radiant, carries lessons not only about wealth but also about the human condition, about ambition, resilience, creativity, and the desire to leave a mark that endures beyond the limits of one's lifetime. The coin's journey is a testament to the interplay of power, culture, and human ingenuity, a story written in gold that continues to speak to all who listen. Ultimately, the crusade waits patiently, its surface worn by centuries of handling, its images slightly softened but still discernible. It invites us to ponder the world it once circulated through, the bustling markets, the royal courts, the distant trading posts, and to appreciate the enduring impact of innovation. More than an artifact, it is a storyteller, a teacher, and a bridge between eras, whispering the triumphs and tribulations of a kingdom that, though long gone, still reaches across time through the silent eloquence of gold. The coin, indeed, has waited for centuries, and it continues to wait, offering its story to anyone willing to engage with its history, its symbolism, and its enduring presence in the tapestry of human civilization. The lantern that never burned. The ancient streets of Han Dynasty China were alive with the quiet hum of a civilization whose shadows stretched long across centuries. In a modest home tucked behind latticed wooden windows and beneath a roof of curved tiles sat an object that defied the natural order of flame and time, the lantern that never burned. Crafted of bronze with meticulous precision, its surface was etched with patterns so intricate that they seemed to move under the flickering light of other lamps, as if whispering secrets in a language older than the empire itself. Historians would later marvel at the fact that this lantern, unlike any ordinary lamp, required no oil, no wick, and no fuel. It simply existed, casting a soft, unwavering glow that was both mysterious and oddly comforting, bathing its surroundings in a luminescence that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The story of its creation is shrouded in legend. Some say it was forged under the guidance of the alchemist Wang Chong, a man obsessed with capturing the essence of eternal light. Others claim it was the work of anonymous artisans, commissioned by a minor Han noble who sought a lamp that could ward off the darkness in both his home and the realm of spirits. The bronze itself was rumored to be a blend of metals uncommon even for the era, sourced from distant mountains and rivers, imbued with natural minerals that when combined, produced an otherworldly radiance. As the lantern rested on its pedestal, its glow seemed to touch every corner of the room, illuminating inked scrolls, ceramic vessels, and the faint outlines of calligraphy on walls, giving the impression that the house itself had become a living manuscript, inscribed with the memory of centuries. Those who encountered the lantern reported strange phenomena. Shadows cast by its light would not mimic the objects around them, instead forming subtle shapes that seemed almost alive. The flicker of a bird in mid-flight, the outline of a distant mountain, the faint silhouette of a procession that never existed. When the lamp was carried outside into the streets, the glow persisted, unaffected by wind, rain, or even the movement of clouds across the moon. Children whispered stories of the lamp guiding lost travelers through alleyways that twisted and turned like labyrinths. Merchants swore that during nights of the full moon, the lantern's illumination would shimmer brighter, reflecting off the polished bronze of their carts and wares, revealing details invisible in the morning sun. And yet, despite its presence in a bustling world, the lantern retained a sense of calm isolation, a quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. The technique behind the lantern's creation has been the subject of endless speculation among historians and engineers alike. Some suggest that the bronze contained trace amounts of luminous minerals, naturally phosphorescent, activated through a process now lost to time. Others believe the artisans harnessed a form of electrochemical reaction, a science far ahead of its era that allowed the lamp to glow without consuming material. Yet another theory proposes a spiritual dimension, that the lantern was infused with rituals intended to capture the presence of light itself, a bridge between the mortal realm and the unseen forces that govern the cycles of day and night. In the quietest hours, when the wind ceased and the world seemed to hold its breath, observers swore they could hear a faint hum, almost musical, emanating from the lamp, as if it resonated with the heartbeat of the earth, or with the pulse of time itself. Families who lived with the lantern found their nights transformed. There was no need for firewood or oil, no concern for the dangers of a flame spreading. Instead, there was only a soft, unwavering glow that seemed to encourage reflection, meditation, and dreams unbounded by fear of darkness. Scholars recorded that dreams experienced in the presence of the lantern were unusually vivid, often containing imagery of ancient landscapes, rituals, and faces from generations past. Travelers from distant provinces would visit, paying homage to the lamp, leaving offerings, and documenting their experiences. Some claimed to glimpse fleeting visions of the Han emperors, their courts, and the rituals performed in vast palaces that no longer stood. Others felt a gentle warmth, not of heat, but of presence, as if the lantern itself was aware of those who drew near. acknowledging their existence with quiet grace. As centuries passed, the Han dynasty faded, leaving only fragments of its grand civilization. Palaces crumbled, temples fell silent, and records of empires were buried beneath the soil. Yet the lantern endured, preserved in the home of families who passed it down from one generation to the next, each aware of its peculiar properties and revered as a silent guardian. During the tumultuous years when dynasties rose and fell in rapid succession, the lantern continued its soft glow, a witness to both triumphs and tragedies. Wars raged around it, yet its light remained untouched, unburned, indifferent to the chaos beyond the walls that sheltered it. It became a symbol of continuity, a reminder that some creations could transcend the limitations of time, and that certain mysteries were meant to endure beyond human comprehension. Legends grew around the lamp. Local villagers spoke of it guiding spirits to rest, of ghosts finding solace in its gentle radiance, and of the lamp appearing in visions to those who had lost their way, both in life and in spirit. Scholars later noted that the patterns etched into the bronze were not merely decorative, but resembled celestial charts, astrological symbols, and representations of natural cycles. It was as if the lamp had encoded within it a map of the universe, a subtle knowledge waiting to be deciphered by those with patience and vision. Many who attempted to study it scientifically found that its properties defied explanation. Thermometers, light meters, and chemical analyses all failed to provide conclusive evidence. The more they investigated, the more the lamp seemed to assert its autonomy, remaining luminous and enigmatic, a relic of both art and science, spirit and matter. Even the emperors of later dynasties sought the lantern. Envoys were sent to acquire it, offerings of gold and precious silks made in the hope of claiming its glow for palaces and temples. Yet the lantern never left the hands of those who understood its true purpose, to be observed, respected, and revered, not possessed. Stories tell of would-be thieves who attempted to remove it, only to be met with inexplicable barriers. Doors locked themselves, shadows twisted to block passage, and the lantern's glow intensified, revealing paths no human could traverse. These accounts, whether true or embellished, only served to enhance the legend, ensuring that the lamp's reputation spread far beyond the province in which it resided, reaching scholars, merchants, and travelers across the breadth of the empire, and even beyond. Time moved relentlessly forward, yet the lantern that never burned remained a constant, a silent observer of the passage of centuries. It illuminated not only rooms but minds, inspiring tales, art, and devotion. Its very existence challenged the understanding of what was possible, blurring the line between technology and magic, science and ritual. Even today, when researchers and enthusiasts seek to study it, the lamp retains an aura that defies full comprehension. Its bronze surface, etched with symbols and patterns that seem almost alive, continues to glow faintly, as if aware of the curiosity, reverence, and awe that surrounds it. Those who encounter it feel a connection that spans generations, a subtle reminder that some creations, no matter how ancient, continue to speak, to illuminate, and to inspire wonder in all who pause to observe them. The lantern's quiet glow had long transcended its physical form, becoming as much a symbol of continuity as an object of wonder. Generations of caretakers came to understand that the lamp's power was not merely in its eternal light, but in its ability to connect observers to something far greater, a shared experience of mystery, history, and the subtle forces that shape the world. Each evening, as twilight descended and shadows grew long, the lamp seemed to awaken. Its light would stretch across wooden beams, dance upon paper scrolls, and touch the delicate features of ancestral portraits, transforming the room into a living tapestry of memory and time. In this glow, every object became more than itself, every shadow carried a story, and every observer felt the gentle pull of countless generations whispering through the bronze. Visitors who entered the house often described a sensation of weightlessness, as if the lamp's illumination relieved them of the burdens of the day. Scholars who studied the Han dynasty found that the lantern's patterns mirrored astronomical charts, showing not only stars and constellations, but also the subtle motions of planets and celestial cycles. Many concluded that the lamp was more than a mere artifact. It was a tool for understanding the universe, a repository of knowledge encoded in metal and light. Ancient texts referenced lamps of eternal flame, but none matched the brilliance and endurance of this Han dynasty creation. Some theorists suggested that the lamp's brilliance was a form of alchemy perfected by unknown masters, blending philosophy, science, and ritual into a single harmonious object. Its glow was steady yet dynamic, subtle yet profound, illuminating truths that words alone could never convey. The lantern's influence extended beyond the home. Entire villages revered its presence, believing that its light could protect them from misfortune. Travelers along the Han roads spoke of seeing a distant glow that guided them through thick fog and treacherous terrain, a luminescence that seemed impossibly steady, unaffected by wind or rain. In certain seasons, when the moon was hidden behind clouds, the lamp appeared to radiate a stronger, almost silvery light, and locals whispered that the lantern was communicating with the heavens, offering guidance or signaling omens. Children, wide-eyed and curious, would gather near its glow, spinning stories of dragons, immortal sages and spirits that moved freely between the realms of light and shadow. Over time, these tales became woven into the cultural fabric of the region, a living tradition that celebrated the lantern as a bridge between the mortal world and the unseen forces that governed it. Through dynastic changes, invasions, and political upheaval, the lantern remained steadfast. Even as palaces were destroyed and cities rebuilt, the lamp endured, safeguarded by families who recognized that it was far more than a decorative object. It was a guardian of history, a silent chronicler of human experience, preserving the memory of lives, events, and beliefs that might otherwise have been lost. Its glow illuminated more than rooms, it illuminated the human imagination, inspiring poets, artisans, and philosophers to contemplate the mysteries of existence. Some accounts speak of scholars who, upon prolonged exposure to its light, experienced visions of distant lands and ancient rituals, as if the lamp itself had the power to transport the mind across time and space. These visions were said to reveal not only the physical world, but also the moral and spiritual truths underlying it, offering glimpses into the interconnectedness of all things. The lamp's intricate bronze surface continued to captivate observers. Every curve, every etched symbol seemed purposeful, as if each detail held a story. Scholars noted motifs resembling rivers, mountains, and celestial orbits, suggesting that the artisans possessed knowledge that bridged both the earthly and the cosmic. Some argued that the lamp's design was influenced by Taoist philosophy, embodying principles of balance, harmony, and eternal flow. Others suggested Buddhist influences, seeing the lamp as a symbol of enlightenment, a light that could never be extinguished by ignorance or suffering. Regardless of interpretation, the lamp's effect was universal. It invited contemplation, respect, and wonder. People who sat before it often found their thoughts slowing, their minds opening to questions larger than themselves, to patterns and meanings that existed beyond immediate comprehension. It became a quiet teacher, guiding observers not with words but with presence and light. Legends persisted of miraculous events associated with the lamp. Some accounts described entire households spared from fire, as if the lantern's glow created an invisible shield. Others spoke of the lamp guiding travelers lost in the vast plains of China, or warning villagers of impending storms through subtle changes in its luminescence. It was said that during moments of personal crisis, those who sat before the lamp would find clarity, inspiration, or peace, as if the light itself communicated with the heart. Priests, scholars, and common folk alike revered the lamp, bringing offerings of incense, coins, and flowers, not out of fear, but out of recognition of its enduring presence and inexplicable power. Even skeptics could not deny its effects. The lamp's glow persisted where candles and torches failed, its brilliance unwavering, a testament to craftsmanship, mystery, and perhaps something beyond human understanding. Scientific inquiry into the lamp only deepened its mystique. Chemists, metallurgists, and physicists who attempted to replicate its properties encountered insurmountable challenges. The bronze alloy resisted all known reactions. No chemical, heat source, or modern technique could reproduce the consistent glow. The lamp's light appeared self-sustaining, unaffected by depletion or decay. Some proposed that the artisans had discovered principles of energy conversion or luminescence far ahead of their time. Others considered metaphysical explanations, positing that the lamp was a vessel for a subtle form of energy, a conduit between the material and spiritual realms. Regardless of the theories, one fact remained incontrovertible. The lantern's illumination endured, silently defying the limitations imposed by nature, history, and human expectation. As dynasties continued to rise and fall, the lamp's reputation grew. Visitors traveled from distant regions to witness its glow, leaving detailed accounts of its properties in journals, letters, and reports. Many recorded the profound sense of calm and reverence the lamp inspired, noting that even in the presence of mundane concerns, the lantern seemed to realign the mind toward contemplation, reflection, and understanding. Families entrusted with the lamp passed it down carefully, aware that its power was not simply in light, but in the experiences it cultivated, the stories, visions, and insights shared across generations. Each caretaker became a custodian, responsible not merely for the object itself, but for preserving the cultural, spiritual, and intellectual heritage that the lantern embodied. Its presence shaped lives, communities, and traditions in ways that transcended simple illumination. In the modern era, when cities expanded and technology transformed daily life, the lantern retained its enigmatic power. Researchers, historians, and enthusiasts traveled to the ancestral home, seeking to study, measure, and document it. Yet every attempt to fully understand or replicate its properties failed, and the lamp remained as mysterious as ever. Photographs and recordings captured only part of its essence, the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and presence eluded mechanized reproduction. Witnesses described a profound, almost meditative clarity, a sense of connection to the past, the cosmos, and the inner self. The lantern's glow seemed to resonate not just with physical matter, but with consciousness itself, bridging centuries of human experience, thought, and imagination. Those who encountered it left with a sense of awe, humility, and wonder, carrying the memory of its light into the wider world, even if they could not fully explain it. The lantern's enduring mystery continues to inspire. Artists depict it in paintings, sculptures, and films. Writers reference it in stories and myths. Philosophers and scientists debate its origin and nature. Each encounter adds layers to its narrative, enriching the legacy of a Han Dynasty creation that refuses to fade. Its light, unwavering across millennia, embodies the human desire for continuity, understanding, and transcendence. In a world where so much is ephemeral, the lantern that never burned endures, a constant reminder that some creations are meant to bridge time, to illuminate the mind, and to inspire wonder long after their makers have passed. It is not merely a lamp, it is a testament, a guardian, and a symbol of the eternal interplay between light, knowledge, and the enduring mysteries that define human history. The necklace that held the sky. In the heart of ancient Egypt, where the Nile's steady flow dictated life, survival, and belief, there existed a creation unlike any other, the beaded collar, known to scholars as the necklace that held the sky. At first glance, it appeared as a simple ornamental piece, a vibrant collection of gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise, and faience, carefully arranged in intricate patterns. Yet the collar was far more than a display of wealth or craftsmanship. It was a symbol of the cosmos, a repository of knowledge, a physical embodiment of the relationship between mortals and the divine. Its beads reflected sunlight with astonishing brilliance, casting tiny, shimmering fragments across temple walls, tombs, and the bodies of those who wore it. The play of light upon its surface was not accidental but deliberate. Each bead represented a star, each pattern a constellation, each color a segment of the heavens that governed the land below. The origins of the necklace stretch deep into Egypt's dynastic past. Pharaohs and high priests commissioned these collars not merely for adornment but as conduits of power. They were worn during ceremonies that aligned with the movements of the stars, during rituals that honored gods both benevolent and fearsome, and during funerary rites that ensured passage into the afterlife. Hieroglyphic records suggest that the collar's creation involved months of painstaking labor, rituals, and offerings, often coinciding with the rising of specific stars such as Sirius, whose appearance heralded the annual flood of the Nile. Each bead was chosen not just for color and luster, but for resonance and symbolism. Carnelian for vitality, lapis for divine connection, turquoise for protection, and gold for the eternal sun itself. Artisans whispered that in placing each bead, they were composing a miniature universe, a reflection of Matat, the principle of order, balance, and cosmic truth. The necklace's influence extended beyond visual splendor. Those who wore it reported subtle, almost imperceptible changes in perception, a heightened sensitivity to rhythms, sounds, and energies of the environment. Priests conducting ceremonies observed that the necklace seemed to harmonize with chants, temple bells, and the natural resonance of stone sanctuaries. When placed upon the chest of a pharaoh, the collar was believed to channel divine authority directly into the wearer, aligning their body and soul with the celestial order. It was said that the necklace could amplify intentions, protect from malevolent spirits, and even grant insight into future events. Some tomb inscriptions describe moments in which the wearer, guided by the light reflecting from the collar, glimpsed visions of lands, gods, and events far beyond the ordinary senses of mortals. The necklace was both tool and talisman, a bridge connecting the ephemeral world of humans to the eternal heavens above. Over centuries, the collar became an object of intrigue, not just within Egypt, but across the ancient world. Traders from distant lands marveled at its brilliance, attempting to replicate its beads and design, yet none could reproduce the precise balance of aesthetics, symbolism, and metaphysical resonance. To artisans, the necklace represented the pinnacle of craft, a benchmark of perfection against which all other works were measured. To priests, it was sacred, a vessel through which divine energy flowed. To the pharaohs, it was a declaration of supremacy, a literal manifestation of their connection to gods and the universe. During festivals, the collar would catch the sunlight in a spectacular display, scattering colored reflections across temple walls and riverbanks, enchanting spectators and reinforcing the illusion that the heavens themselves had descended to earth. In every gleam, every reflection, the collar whispered secrets of eternity. The beaded collar's design was a language, a visual scripture that chronicled celestial cycles, seasonal changes, and the eternal struggle between chaos and order. Its semicircular structure mirrored the arc of the sky. Its rows of beads represented planetary orbits and the alignment of constellations significant to Egyptian astrology. Some scholars propose that the arrangement encoded astronomical calculations used in agriculture, predicting floods, planting cycles, and harvests. Others argue that the collar's patterns mirrored the journey of the soul through the afterlife, a visual map guiding the wearer safely past demons, tests, and trials toward divine reunion. In essence, the necklace that held the sky was a manual of both survival and transcendence, a tangible expression of Egypt's mastery of art, science, and spirituality. Each layer told a story, each color held meaning, and each arrangement preserved knowledge that might have otherwise vanished beneath the sands of time. Legends tell of extraordinary instances when the collar seemed to act autonomously, interacting with the wearer and environment in ways that defied explanation. In one account, a high priestess placed the necklace in a ceremonial hall during an eclipse. As the moon moved across the sun, the beads glowed with an inner radiance, casting a celestial pattern upon the walls, illuminating hieroglyphs that had been hidden for centuries. Observers noted that the light seemed to pulse in rhythm with the chanting, as though the necklace itself had become an instrument, amplifying both voice and vision. In another tale, a pharaoh in his tomb was said to have been guided through perilous visions of the underworld by the necklace's glow, the colors shifting to mark safe paths, warning of danger, and revealing passages that would otherwise have remained hidden. Such accounts blurred the line between artifact and living entity, reinforcing the idea that the necklace was a participant in the human experience, not a passive object. The collar's journey through history was as complex as its design. Tomb robbers, conquerors, and collectors coveted it, yet it often seemed to resist capture. Some stories describe the necklace disappearing mysteriously during invasions, only to reappear centuries later in unexpected places, always intact, its brilliance undiminished. These instances reinforced the mystical aura surrounding it. It was more than mere gold and beads, it was an enduring symbol of continuity, order, and celestial alignment. In times of political upheaval, the collar became a quiet stabilizer, a reminder of eternal truths amidst human uncertainty. Those entrusted with it recognized that its significance extended beyond aesthetics or wealth. It was a beacon of cultural memory, a physical embodiment of Egypt's understanding of the cosmos, and a source of guidance for generations. The necklace that held the sky was also a masterclass in craft. Every bead was hand-shaped, polished, and engraved, a testament to meticulous skill. Artisans used techniques that integrated metallurgy, mineralogy, and symbolic design in a way that remains astonishing to modern scholars. Its creation required not only dexterity, but deep understanding of spiritual symbolism and astronomical knowledge. Some speculate that the collar's design allowed it to resonate with sunlight in ways that created subtle energy fields, a proto-scientific manipulation of light and perception. Regardless of mechanism, the result was undeniable. The collar commanded attention, inspired awe, and imparted a sense of connection to forces far beyond the mundane. It was an object of beauty, knowledge, and metaphysical potency simultaneously. Even in contemporary times, the necklace continues to captivate the imagination of historians, archaeologists, and artists. Museum displays allow visitors to see its shimmering colors, yet photographs in glass cases cannot capture the full effect. Scholars often speak of its luminosity as alive, interactive, almost sentient, responding to observers in ways that are subtle yet unmistakable. The intricate layering of beads, each carefully placed for both visual impact and symbolic meaning, evokes a sense of order and cosmic harmony. Its design principles are studied as exemplars of ancient ingenuity, blending science, spirituality, and aesthetics in a single artifact. To gaze upon it is to glimpse a civilization's understanding of existence, the interplay of light and life, and the eternal pursuit of connection between humanity and the heavens. As we reach the twilight of Part 1, it becomes clear that the necklace that held the sky is not merely a historical object. It is a story, a teacher, and a guide. It embodies centuries of belief, observation, artistry, and devotion, preserving the essence of ancient Egypt in a tangible form. Its light, both literal and metaphorical, continues to shine, bridging the past with the present, reminding those who encounter it that human ingenuity, reverence, and curiosity are enduring forces. The collar is an artifact, yes, but it is also a living chronicle of how one civilization sought to capture the cosmos, to understand the eternal cycles of life, and to preserve a connection to what lies beyond mortal perception. Its legacy is immeasurable, and its story is far from complete. As the millennia passed, the necklace that held the sky maintained its enigmatic presence, quietly influencing the course of history in ways subtle yet profound. Its journey from the hands of ancient artisans to tombs and temples, from plundering hands to careful preservation, mirrors the ebb and flow of Egyptian civilization itself: rise, apex, decline, and rediscovery. In every phase, the collar's existence remained more than ornamental. It was a compass for the human spirit, a reflection of cosmic order, and a repository of the sacred knowledge of an entire culture. Even as dynasties fell and foreign conquerors ruled the Nile Valley, the collar endured, an object of reverence and fascination that never fully revealed its secrets to mortal eyes. In the temples where priests maintained rituals to honor the gods, the collar held a silent dominion. When placed upon the statue of a deity, it was said to lend a vitality that transformed the carved stone into a vessel for divine presence. Priests described a sensation of heat and energy flowing through the stone, a vibration that resonated throughout the temple's sanctuaries, and the sense that the walls themselves were listening. Each bead reflected not only light but intention. The subtle patterns of its arrangement seemed to align with specific frequencies of sound and energy, a forgotten technology of the ancients that amplified devotion and intention. Visitors to these temples, unaware of the metaphysical resonance, would sometimes report feeling an inexplicable sense of calm or awe, a subtle pull toward contemplation, as though the collar, though unseen, was shaping their perception of space, time, and reality. Its influence extended into the afterlife, where the collar was a guide and guardian. Tomb inscriptions and funerary texts reference the necklace as a key to navigating the complex journey beyond death. When laid across the chest of a deceased pharaoh, the collar was believed to illuminate the path through the duat, the Egyptian underworld, marking the locations of both peril and sanctuary. Each bead served as a symbolic lantern, and each pattern acted as a map to ensure the safe passage of the soul past serpents, devourers, and judges of the dead. Priests in charge of mummification often whispered that the collar's proper placement could prevent a soul from wandering aimlessly or being trapped in the liminal spaces between worlds. Such claims underscore the duality of the artifact. It was both aesthetic and functional, earthly and transcendent, a bridge between human and divine, living and eternal. Over centuries, foreign eyes and hands would encounter the collar, each encounter adding layers to its story. Greek envoys, Roman historians, and later, Renaissance scholars marveled at its construction and symbolism. Accounts describe envoys presenting it to kings and emperors, not merely as a gift, but as a lesson in cosmic order. Observers noted the meticulous craft of its artisans, the careful color sequencing, and the alignment with celestial cycles, often remarking that the collar seemed to contain knowledge beyond the reach of ordinary human comprehension. Some claimed that even in glass cases, away from the sun and temple rituals, the collar continued to project an aura of influence, subtly shifting light and shadow in the room, as if maintaining a presence in defiance of containment. The collar's role in rituals is another layer of its enduring legacy. During sacred ceremonies, it was often worn by the high priest or priestess, whose movements and gestures were believed to direct the flow of divine energy. Historical texts describe chants and music performed in synchrony with the collar's reflective light, producing a resonance that affected all participants. Some records suggest that the collar amplified intention, allowing thoughts, prayers, or even political authority to extend beyond the confines of the temple. The effect was both psychological and physical. Participants often reported vivid visions, a sense of unity with cosmic forces, and an awareness of the interconnectedness of time, space, and human action. In essence, the collar was an instrument of transcendence, a medium through which the sacred could become perceptible to mortal senses. Archaeological evidence further illustrates the collar's reach. Numerous tombs, from the most modest to the most opulent, contained fragments of beaded collars that echoed its design, suggesting a widespread cultural aspiration to capture even a fragment of the power and symbolism of the necklace that held the sky. These fragments demonstrate consistent craftsmanship, color symbolism, and design patterns, indicating a shared understanding of their metaphysical purpose. Some beads are found far from their point of origin, suggesting that trade, conquest, or ritual exchange helped propagate its influence across the ancient world. Even fragments retained a certain energy. Modern studies show that the specific materials chosen, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Nubia, carnelian from the eastern desert, were selected not only for beauty, but for their symbolic and spiritual resonance, believed to possess intrinsic properties affecting both wearer and environment. The stories surrounding the collar are replete with subtle miracles. One account describes a high priestess during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who placed the collar upon her chest during a solar alignment. The reflection of sunlight through its beads projected intricate patterns upon the walls, illuminating previously unseen hieroglyphs detailing forgotten rituals. These inscriptions, preserved through the collar's light, guided generations of priests in their ceremonial practices. In another account, a pharaoh during the Ptolemaic dynasty reportedly received visions of future events while wearing the necklace, predictions that influenced decisions regarding agriculture, warfare, and diplomacy. Such narratives blur the line between myth and reality, reinforcing the idea that the collar was more than an artifact. It was a participant in history, a silent observer, and occasional influencer of human affairs. The necklace's symbolic resonance extended into the realms of art and architecture. Temple walls, tombs, and even urban layouts reflected patterns reminiscent of the collar, suggesting that its aesthetic principles shaped broader aspects of Egyptian civilization. Scholars propose that the semicircular form, with layered rows and carefully orchestrated colors, informed designs of ceremonial spaces, processional paths, and even pyramidal architecture. The layering of beads, with the interplay of color and light, served as a microcosm of cosmic order, mirroring the alignment of celestial bodies that guided agricultural, religious, and social rhythms. It was as if the collar's design principles were a template for civilization itself, meticulous, harmonious, and attuned to the cosmos. Even as Egypt's political landscape shifted under foreign domination, the necklace's aura remained untouchable. While conquerors sought gold and artifacts for material wealth, few understood the collar's deeper significance. Those who possessed it often regarded it with reverence or trepidation, sensing an intangible force within. Stories from the Napoleonic expeditions, 19th-century collectors, and early archaeological teams hint at an almost conscious presence, a subtle influence that guided, repelled, or illuminated. In some cases, items believed to be fragments of the original collar were treated with extraordinary care, recognizing that damage might disrupt an unseen balance, not merely destroy a piece of material culture. Even separated from its original context, the collar seemed to demand respect, a reminder that power, knowledge, and beauty are inseparable from intent and awareness. Modern scholarship continues to grapple with the necklace that held the sky. Techniques such as X-ray fluorescence, 3D modeling, and spectral analysis have revealed aspects of its construction that were previously invisible: the layering of enamel to enhance color, the precise curvature of gold strips to maximize reflection, and the subtle gradation of bead sizes to create dynamic visual effects. These studies confirm that ancient artisans were not only skilled technicians but also keen observers of natural phenomena, capable of integrating aesthetics, symbolism, and physics into a single artifact. Yet even with these insights, the collar's metaphysical qualities, the sense of presence, alignment, and resonance remain largely intangible, resisting scientific quantification. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity and the perennial quest to harmonize the earthly with the cosmic. The necklace also served as a cultural touchstone. Its imagery, replicated in frescoes, reliefs, and ceremonial objects, became shorthand for divine authority and cosmic order. Pharaohs commissioned representations of themselves wearing simplified versions of the collar, projecting both earthly power and divine favor. Priests used motifs derived from the necklace to instruct novices, teaching the principles of Matan and the celestial cycles through symbolic representation. Even in death, the collar guided and protected, a reminder that the boundaries between life, afterlife, and eternity are intertwined in a delicate balance of design, intent, and belief. It was at once a practical tool, a work of art, a sacred instrument, and a cosmological map. As we contemplate the necklace that held the sky today, it is not merely an artifact preserved in museum glass, but a portal into a civilization's soul. Its brilliance, intricacy, and layered symbolism invite reflection on how ancient humans perceived and interacted with the universe. Its presence challenges modern assumptions about the separation of art, science, and spirituality, revealing a world in which these elements were inseparable, where a necklace could guide the living, influence the dead, and align human intention with the cosmos itself. The story of the necklace is ongoing, continuing to inspire wonder, curiosity, and reverence across millennia. In every bead, every pattern, every glimmer of reflected light, the necklace that held the sky reminds us of humanity's enduring desire to reach beyond, to understand, to connect with the infinite, and to leave a mark upon the eternal fabric of the universe. The cloak that silenced shadows. Beneath the frozen soils of the Altai Mountains, in a land where the wind carries whispers older than memory, archaeologists unearthed a burial mound, a kurgan, that held within it the traces of a world long vanished. It was there, preserved in permafrost, that they found the Pazyryk felt cloak, a garment unlike any other, woven of wool and mystery, adorned with swirling patterns of beasts and spirits, and carrying with it an aura that defied explanation. They called it a cloak, but it was more than clothing. To those who wore it, to those who understood its meaning, it was a shield, a statement, a map of worlds both seen and unseen. And in the centuries that followed, it came to be known by another name, the cloak that silenced shadows. The Pazyryk culture flourished in the 5th century BCE, nomads of the Eurasian steppe, horse lords whose lives were bound to the rhythm of the land. They lived between forest and grassland, mountain and plain, their horizons endless, their lives shaped by migration, trade, and the ever-present need for survival. To them, clothing was never just fabric. A cloak was warmth against snowstorms, protection against wind, but also a proclamation of identity. In a world where tribe and kinship meant survival, garments spoke in patterns, colors, and symbols. The felt cloak unearthed in the frozen tomb was more than utility. It was a woven testament to their place in the cosmos. Felt itself was sacred to the nomads. It was born not from the loom, but from the compression of wool, the matting of fibers through water, pressure, and movement. It was the material of tents, rugs, and armor. It was the skin of their homes, the fabric of their world. But the cloak stood apart. Unlike plain coverings, its surface bore spirals of red and gold, deer leaping, griffins twisting, and abstract shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves like whirlpools of meaning. The imagery was alive, carrying a vitality that could not be dismissed as mere decoration. Scholars argue that the patterns were a cosmogram, a diagram of existence, binding earth, sky, and underworld into a single tapestry. To wear the cloak was to embody order, to silence the chaos that lurked in the shadows. When a warrior donned the cloak, he was not merely dressed, he was armored in spirit. The swirling deer across its surface symbolized swiftness of soul, the eternal journey of life into death and back again. The griffins, part eagle, part lion, stood as guardians of thresholds, creatures that belonged neither fully to this world nor the next. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, reminders that the unseen was always watching. The cloak's patterns did not simply sit upon the surface, they seemed to move, to shift with the wearer, creating the illusion that beasts danced in perpetual motion across his body. In fireside light, the cloak shimmered, its designs flickering between form and abstraction, as though alive. Legends say the cloak was worn in ritual, in battle, and in burial. When worn by a shaman, it was said to quiet the restless spirits that prowled the edges of the camp. It was believed that shadows themselves, embodiments of fear, sorrow, and malice, recoiled from the cloak's designs, unable to withstand the balance it imposed. At night, when steppe winds howled and wolves prowled, those who huddled beneath the cloak felt not only warmth but silence, a protective stillness, as though the cloak muted the unseen whispers that haunted the darkness. The Pazyryk believed in a world layered, where the living and the dead walked close, separated only by a thin veil. In such a cosmos, a garment that could silence shadows was no small thing. It was not fashion, not status, but survival of the soul. It gave the wearer clarity, focus, and courage to step into uncertain realms. Warriors marched into battle beneath it, certain that no curse, no ill omen, no enemy's glance could undo them. Shamans sat beneath its folds, staring into smoke, seeing visions unmarred by the interference of restless shades. Even chiefs were buried in it. The cloak spread across their still bodies as they entered the underworld, its patterns guiding them, silencing the doubts and fears that might weigh a soul down. Centuries turned, and the cloak lay in silence beneath the frozen ground. When archaeologists uncovered it, they were astonished by its preservation, the colors still vivid, the fibers intact, as though it had been woven only yesterday. They lifted it gently, as if afraid it might crumble, yet it did not. Instead, it exhaled a story, its presence commanding awe. In the museum halls where it now rests, visitors often remark on a peculiar sensation in its presence. Some say the air grows quieter. Others say they feel watched. A few describe a strange calm, as though burdens they carried were briefly lifted. Science can explain the preservation, the technique, the artistry, but not the atmosphere that surrounds it. That belongs to something older, something that hums just beyond reason. To understand the cloak fully, one must see it not as a single object, but as part of a greater fabric of culture. The Pazyryk did not carve cities into stone. Their monuments were their horses, their tattoos, their woven tapestries. Their stories lived in wood, wool, and flesh, and when these faded, the earth itself preserved what was most sacred. The cloak, then, is not merely a remnant, but a voice. It carries the silence of the steppe, the cold breath of winter, the pounding of hooves, the crackle of ritual fire. It carries the faces of those who wore it, the hands that pressed its fibers, the eyes that watched its patterns dance in firelight. Its silence is not empty, it is full. It silences shadows not by erasing them, but by acknowledging them, weaving them into a greater whole where fear loses its teeth. The cloak says, yes, shadows exist, but they do not rule here. They are quieted, folded into the patterns, bound to the harmony of the whole. That is why it was revered, why it was buried with chiefs, why it survived the centuries. It was more than warmth, it was balance itself. And so the cloak that silenced shadows endures. Preserved in ice, carried into light, it continues to whisper without words. It teaches that garments can be more than fabric, that symbols can be more than art, that silence can be stronger than sound. It reminds us that those who walked the earth before us, though separated by centuries, shared the same fears, the same need for order, the same longing for protection against the unseen. The Pazyryk cloak was their answer, their shield, their song of stillness. And though we may never hear its full voice, its presence continues to quiet the shadows in the museum, in memory, in the imagination of all who stand before it. The wind still blows across the Altai, carrying whispers through pine and stone. Shadows still lengthen at dusk, and fears still take form in silence. But the cloak remains, a relic of wool and spirit, an unbroken thread across time. It waits in stillness, neither shouting nor boasting, only watching, only silencing, for the cloak knows that true power is not noise, nor violence, nor spectacle. True power is balance. True power is silence. The cloak that silenced shadows holds that silence still. The drum that summoned rain. The artifact rests in silence now, beneath glass, far from the soil where it once commanded the skies. Its bronze is darkened by centuries of touch, green with the slow breath of time, etched with figures whose stories have grown thin in memory. To most who glance upon it, it is just an object, a drum, heavy and mute. But to those who pause, who let their eyes linger long enough for the patterns to whisper, the silence begins to fill. For this was not simply an instrument, it was a voice, a pulse, a bridge between earth and heaven. The people who cast it in fire believed it could call the clouds themselves, and perhaps for a time it did. The drum was said to have been born in fire and thunder, bronze, pulled from the red veins of earth, melted until it ran like sunlight. Into that molten stream the smiths poured not just metal, but prayers. Patterns were carved into molds, spirals like storms, lines like rivers, figures of men with arms raised as if to welcome rain. When the molds cracked apart and the drum emerged still glowing, it was not only a thing of human hands, it was an offering and a promise. To strike it was to awaken more than sound. The air would tremble, the ground would stir, and voices would carry farther than the ear could follow. Each deep note seemed to swell upward, as if invisible steps rose from the drum's skin into the waiting sky. Elders said the sound climbed into the clouds, coaxing them to gather, to thicken, to darken, until at last rain would fall. The people called it, not just a drum, but the drum that summoned rain. Imagine a season when the rivers shrank and the soil cracked. Days would burn with a heat that hollowed every shadow. Nights would hang heavy and dry. Children's laughter would fade, replaced by coughing in the dust. Livestock would stumble with hollow eyes, and granaries would empty like drained shells. In those hours the community would gather in the clearing, where the drum stood waiting beneath its shelter of carved wood. Priests would circle it, their bodies painted with earth and ash. They would carry gourds of water, precious as gold, and pour a few drops over the bronze, as if reminding the sky of what it had forgotten. The drum's keeper, a figure chosen not by blood but by omens, would step forward. His hands would hover above the drumhead, like wings ready to strike. Silence would stretch until even the wind seemed to lean in. Then, with the first blow, a sound would erupt, deep, round, vast, like the heartbeat of the world. It was never played as music, it was played as command. Each strike was measured, each rhythm traced from patterns older than memory. The people would chant, their voices weaving between the notes, calling on ancestors, on spirits, on the clouds themselves. And as the sound rose, so too did the hope of every heart gathered there. There were stories of times when the sky answered almost at once, a single crack of thunder breaking the silence, a wind rushing in from nowhere, the scent of wet earth rising even before the first drop fell. The people would cry out with joy as rain drenched their faces, carrying away dust, filling empty jars, blessing the parched soil. In those moments, no one doubted that the drum's voice was mighty enough to reach heaven itself, but there were darker tales too. Stories whispered of years when the sky did not answer, when the drum was struck until the hands of the keeper bled, yet the air remained empty, the clouds thin, the earth hard. In those years, fear grew heavy. People wondered if the drum had been offended, if the bronze no longer carried the prayers, if some secret corruption had silenced it. They would search for causes, a broken taboo, a forgotten offering, a word spoken against the ancestors. Blame would coil like smoke, and punishment would fall upon the unlucky. Still, the drum endured. It passed from hand to hand, through generations and upheavals. Wars came, kingdoms rose and fell. Traders crossed seas with ships heavy with iron, cloth and guns. Yet through it all, the drum remained. It was carried into battles, where its booming call was said to summon not rain but courage, steadying the march of warriors. It was played at coronations, its voice mingling with songs of praise, as if crowning the king not only with gold but with thunder. Bronze remembers. Every strike leaves a trace, though the ear may not hear it. Over centuries, the drum grew dense with echoes, each layer of sound pressed into its body like invisible inscriptions. To touch it now is to rest one's hand upon centuries of storms, festivals, desperate prayers, victories, and losses. It has heard more voices than any single human life could ever hold. When outsiders first encountered it, they did not see the power it carried. To them, it was a curiosity, an artifact, a lump of decorated bronze. They noted its size, its weight, its patterns, but not the way the air once bent to its call. Taken from its homeland, placed in halls of stone and glass, its voice was stilled. No priest circled it with chants, no keeper struck its head with purpose. It became an exhibit, silent, waiting. And yet, perhaps it is not silent at all. Step close enough, lean past the barrier, and look into the patterns carved into its bronze. Spirals like storms still curl, figures still raise their arms. If you listen, not with ears but with patience, you may sense a vibration beneath the hush of the museum air. Not sound, but memory, a resonance that has never fully gone. Some say on days when thunder approaches, the drum seems to quiver faintly, as if remembering its ancient role. The people who cast it are long gone, their voices scattered, their rituals broken, but the drum remains, a witness to the longing of humanity, to call out to forces larger than ourselves, to beg the heavens for mercy, to believe that our voices might reach the clouds, and so it waits. For though bronze is patient, time is endless, and perhaps one day, somewhere, the drum will be struck again. A deep note will climb invisible steps into the sky, and rain, as if remembering, will fall. For what is an artifact if not a sleeper, dreaming of the days when it lived? The drum that summoned rain still dreams, and perhaps, even now, somewhere above, the clouds are listening. And so, another artifact slips back into the shadows of history, leaving us with more questions than answers. If you enjoyed this journey through time, please subscribe to Unearthed Secrets, leave a like, and share where you're watching from. Until the next mystery, sleep well and dream of the past.